The door closed tightly, the red light came on, entry was prohibited, filming began. There were two characters on the set, a girl and a young man. The girl asked the young man if he was really So's deputy, his sister. The film crew watched their every move carefully. On the set, an argument began to flare up between the actors. The young man said that because of her unfounded jealousy, he would soon go crazy, to which she responded by saying that this was not at all unfounded jealousy. The very next moment, the door to the room opened very quietly. A young man in a suit quietly told the director that he was being called from the tax office. The director got angry at the guy and said that he really didn't see that they were having a serious conversation, and he had to leave immediately. At that moment, the director said stop and then added cut. A few minutes later, he shouted that they should continue after the break and thanked everyone for their efforts. In his opinion and the opinion of everyone else who took part in this filming, it was a great job. It was a normal shooting day. The director has always called for a decorator and they were already here. When the decorator was putting on a fur coat in the corridor, he touched that same guy in the suit. He apologized to him. The guy said that everything was fine. Then another one of the film crew walked past this guy and again hit him with his shoulder. He also asked him for forgiveness. The guy again said that everything was fine. The guys in the film crew didn't understand how an actor could be like this guy in a suit, be invisible. No one noticed him. The spirit of acting was watching everything that was happening on this set, and he was also surprised why people didn't even notice this guy. This spirit of acting exists from another world that wandered around the set and absorbed the energy of acting during filming. He could not understand whether this guy was a person or a spirit. He was bored and decided to watch him. The assistant director shouted that they were now removing price number 47 and that everyone should get ready. One of the actors started this. He told his son that the image and confiscation were now caused by a denunciation from one of his own. On the set, a fire was flaring up. One of the actors was shouting, "Who dared? What was going on here?" The door, like last time, very quietly opened, and the same actor entered the office on the set. The spirit of acting, watching what was happening on the set, thought that something was wrong with this actor. Namely, he felt that he had very little vital energy. The spirit did not understand how he managed to become an actor. If he now shared a little energy with him, then this guy would most likely start to act better. The spirit decided to go for this experiment. He shared his acting energy with this guy just at the moment when the guy walked onto the set. One of the actors who was already on the set asked him why he came. The young man felt the power of an actor in himself and began to act like never before in his life. He began to talk about how they should have stopped in time because he was their informer. The spirit of acting, watching everything that was happening on this set, was very surprised. Because it seemed that this guy had been replaced, he began to play his role so talentedly. He began to say, were they really surprised because a cornered mouse can bite a cat? Not only the spirit of acting was surprised, but also the partners who played this son with him on the set. The director and the entire film crew that took part in this shooting were also surprised by his acting skills. The spirit of acting was pleased that he had not wasted his acting energy today. He found it funny to watch all of this. One of the actors who participated in this scene turned around sharply and looked at the guy, and there was anger in his eyes. He couldn't hold back and screamed, throwing all the papers lying on the table off the table. At this moment, the director said, "It was superbly filmed." The director thanked everyone involved in this scene. He said that it was excellent work and so cool, he liked everything. Then he suddenly turned to the young man and asked his name, and then added that he hadn't noticed it in that take, but the guy had set a great precedent in that scene. The young man bowed, said thank you very much, and answered his question. His name was Yuman. The director told him to leave his portfolio with director Joe. The young man thanked him. For him, it was a big victory. For the first time in his life, he was noticed. Before that, no director had taken him seriously in 15 years of acting. He knew perfectly well that when he goes on stage, his arms and legs become heavy and he is thrown under, but he just played the way he always wanted to. He himself was very pleased to understand that he had finally succeeded. He even thought that he had revealed his potential. All good things come to an end. On this day, he went to the doctor for a routine examination, but what they told him was practically a death sentence. He had the last stage of liver cancer. The doctor said that cancer cells were already harming other organs and recommended immediate hospitalization for this guy. He was in shock. He did not understand how this could happen suddenly, to which the doctor replied that his case was not typical. Usually people come to the hospital earlier because of jaundice or extreme fatigue. His case was asymptomatic. When he left the doctor's office, he didn't understand what to do next and where to go. He walked along the long corridor of this hospital and thought about how, since childhood, He had often been ill for a long time. But why did this illness appear suddenly? The guy sat down in the hallway and thought that it was most likely because of the alcohol. He understood that the cancer was caused by his drinking. He had no other explanation. He lowered his head and covered his face with his palms so that no one would see him at that moment. He didn't know what to do next. When he raised his head, he looked at his hands. He was very upset and did not understand how to be in the evening casting, because he thought that today something should definitely work out. Should he really give up? The guy looked at his hands and thought about the feeling that he had in the morning during filming. It was the feeling that he could play well. He thought if he could feel just one more time the same thing he felt this morning, then he decided that a miracle would have to happen. Already in the evening, he realized that a miracle would not happen, and he shouldn't have believed in it. He's just an ordinary weirdo. He walked and scolded himself because he went to the casting with risks to his life, and the result was still the same. Then he returned to his home. He realized that he was an ordinary guy, besta, talent, and all he does is dream, but he hasn't even learned anything about life. Opening the door of his room, he went inside. There were many scenarios on the floor in his room. He walked up to the scripts lying on the floor and stepped on them with one foot. He thought that he had never received a leading role, and even supporting roles could be counted on one hand. Well, in fact, in terms of the number of works, he was not inferior to any other actor. He played a dozen supporting characters. He also played hundreds of episodic roles, which he thought were very good. And more than 1,000 times, he was an ordinary extra, one that no one could recognize even after the film came out. And as a result of his work, he got the life he lived. He had no recognition. No one simply noticed him as an actor. At that moment, he sat and thought about only one thing: how to tell his family about cancer. He left home more than 10 years ago when he said that he would become an actor. During all this time, he did not write or call or show up. He did not know how he could appear in front of his family. After all this, he took a sip, and at that moment he heard someone's voice that said to give him the same. The guy turned around and saw a spirit in front of him. His first reaction was a loud scream. He couldn't imagine that there was someone else in the room with him. The guy stepped back, asking himself what it was that was in front of him. The spirit of acting told him that it was very impolite to behave like that. The spirit stopped and sat right in front of him. The spirit said that his name is the spirit of acting. The guy was very surprised. He thought that it was all because of his experience and because he drank. He definitely decided that he had a squirrel and that it was all just his imagination. To which the spirit replied that he was not imagining anything. The spirit of the actor's game came closer, sniffed the guy, and said that he had almost no vital energy and he should have died a long time ago. At that moment, the guy said that he had just found out the date of his death today. The spirit of the actor's mountain laughed and said that he thought so. The guy couldn't get used to it and thought that it was a vision. The spirit of acting took the can and took a few sips from it. Then he asked what his name was. The guy replied that his name was Yuman. Unexpectedly for him, the spirit of acting told him that they were similar in childhood. Thanks to his name, he survived. The guy wanted to know how it was. Then the spirit explained to him that the name is superimposed on the essence. His name means existence. It again emphasizes that he exists. Then the spirit added that he still doesn't understand how he managed to live longer than 20 years. And most importantly, the spirit of acting did not understand how he could still work as an actor because of the vital energy of other people. He must have been constrained. The guy couldn't help himself and asked what it meant. He was no longer so skeptical about the spirit, to which he heard the answer that life energy manifests itself through charisma. The spirit replied that if there is no charisma, no one will notice him even if he's very huge. And if the level of charisma is high, then people themselves will pay attention to him as to, for example, a beauty. People also call this an aura. Ordinary people have charisma of about 50, actors have 60, 70, and top actors have aura of up to 90. The spirit looked at this guy and said that he doesn't even have 30 charisma. He has less than ordinary people. His charisma is at the level of the spirit. And then the spirit of acting added that in the morning he felt so sorry for him that he helped him a little and wanted to know what he felt. At that moment, the guy was surprised because that morning he was on the set and he really did well there. The guy thought that the feeling he had for the first time arose because of the spirit of acting. The guy got really excited. Otherwise, he couldn't convince himself that it was incredible he had experienced something like this for the first time. He had never had anything like this. And he also said that if you increase your life force, you can play even better. But this is only possible if you increase your life force. Then he thought about it because he remembered what the doctor told him today. He has cancer and he will die soon. Then he said that he didn't care about anything because he was going to die soon anyway. The spirit of acting thought. A man like him, who lived his whole life with such an amount of energy, regretted not his past and not the chosen path of an actor. He regretted the lack of a future and his career. The spirit of the actor's mountain this morning added energy to him to a level not inferior to others, but he surpassed it and riveted the gaze of all present. The spirit of the acting remembered how happy he was at that moment, and he really attracted the attention of everyone around him. So the spirit decided that the guy needed to return his 20 years. That was the only way he could save him. The spirit told him that he would return and add vital energy to him on one condition. The young man wanted to know what these conditions were. The spirit of the acting game said that he should show a good game, only this will be to his liking. The guy was a little surprised and asked if this is really possible. Then the spirit of acting told him that yes, although he would have to use the 10th tail, it would be a very big sacrifice on his part. The guy was even more surprised. Could there be anything good that was supposed to touch him? He asked the spirit if he was really an angel. The spirit of acting said that no, he is not an angel. There is a benefit for him here too, and he looked very slyly at the young man. Despite these words, the guy replied that he still thanked him very much. The spirit of acting said that in that case, it was time for them to sign a contract. Immediately after that, he would return to his 20s. At that moment, the guy remembered what happened to him at 20. He tried to stop and say something because he didn't want to go back to that age because there was the army there and he definitely didn't want to end up in it a second time under any circumstances. Opening his eyes, he looked around. He was lying on the bed, still didn't understand what happened to him. Right in front of him on the pillow lay that very spirit of acting, who immediately said hello to him. Then the spirit of acting asked the boy how he felt in his young body. The guy was very surprised. He stepped back and started asking what happened and what it all meant. Then the spirit of acting told him that they had made a contract. The spirit of acting told the guy that yesterday he was against going back to his 20s, and so he rewinded to 23, that is, 15 years ago. At that moment, the guy thought that everything that happened to him was not a figment of his imagination or a dream. He looked around, then looked at himself, and thought that everything that happened to him was true. Looking around, he realized that this was not the room he lived in at that age. It was his parents' house. But why was he here? Everything in this room was as he left it when he left his parents' house. The same computer and the same things. The guy looked at the spirit and asked why he was now so small, to which the spirit told him that he was also sacrificing this transition, and he was also somehow maintaining this appearance. The young man thought that the spirit of acting now resembled a small dog, and it barked so cutely, but he could not tell him that. He told him thank you and that he would make every effort to ensure that his investment was not wasted. The next moment he felt something new, something he had never felt before. He tried to concentrate his attention. A table appeared in front of him, where it was written that a contract with the spirit of acting was concluded. According to the contract, he should receive charisma from the spirit. His charisma was 29 out of 100. The spirit of the acting game said that he saw everything with his own eyes. It's all because they have a contract, and now he has to give him charisma. The guy had to choose a number from 20 to 50. The young man thought that if he was given a choice, he would of course choose the largest number, and he said 50. The young man wondered if it was so good to have high charisma, because he never had it, and he was always invisible. At that moment, he remembered a recent conversation with one of his friends who was upset about his performance. Then he told him, if it was not the main role, it was not worth being too conspicuous. A secondary actor should not overshadow the main one. The guy remembered that this is exactly why he heard so many screams and bad words from his side during filming. Therefore, he understood that everything has its pros and cons. So in addition to everything else, you also need to work hard. The young man thought for a bit and said that 25 would be enough for him. That the spirit of acting told him that he could get all 50 at once. He doesn't understand why he does this. To which the young man replied that he would not always star in leading roles. Too much charisma could become an obstacle, and I would not invite him. The spirit of acting said that he was indeed right, because it is not interesting at all when everything comes very easily. The very next moment he saw that he had received charisma from the spirit of acting, and his charisma was already 54 out of 100. The spirit of acting asked that his charisma had increased, and how he felt now that something had changed in him. The young man made a few movements and said that his mood had improved, and a certain lightness had appeared in his body. He thanked the spirit. The young man looked at the spirit of acting, and thought that it was somehow not fitting for this appearance to be called a spirit. At that moment, he looked at him and thought, if he is a kumiho, Then he will call him Miho, to which the spirit told him he can call him whatever he wants. The boy stretched out his hands and picked up the spirit like a little puppy. Then he said thank you again, but he had already said thank you. Miho, the spirit of acting, said that it was not worth the gratitude. At that moment, the young man thought that at 23, he had just been reinstated at the university, and most likely he would have to go to study. He asked Miho if he would go with him, to which the spirit of acting replied that he was too lazy and was only interested in acting. After some time, he was near the university. He was standing in front of the university and reading the announcements that they were welcoming first-year students to the university. The young man thought that he had not been to the university for so long, and he really wanted to. He thought about the fact that while he was at home, he still couldn't believe that he had returned to his 23 years old. Look around, he saw that he really returned at that time by the clothes of the people. The spirit of that time was immediately felt. It was the style of autumn in his heart. The young man thought that the first lesson after being reinstated in school was the same one that he had been walking and thinking about the last time, and did not hear that the girl had offered him something. The guy was in a hurry so as not to be late for class. The girl shouted for him to stop and turned to him. She screamed so loudly that he had no choice but to stop. She told him to stand, a student in a jacket from the Faculty of Management. The young man stopped, turned around, looked at her, and asked if she was addressing him. The girl said that she was addressing him specifically and that he should take an advertising flyer for their clubs. The young man took this flyer and thought that this couldn't be true because no one had ever noticed it before. Could it be that he was given a leaflet on the street? He was very happy because it happened to him for the first time in his life. He received a flyer on the street. As he walked, he thought of only one thing, that this happened to him only because now he had more vital energy. He walked and felt that all his feelings had changed. They were completely different from what they had been in his past life. He'd already approached the auditorium where his classes were to take place at that moment. He thought that, in that case, this time he would do everything differently. He walked into the classroom and saw 3 students who paid attention to him. One of the guys in particular looked straight at the young man, and it seemed that he saw him as a rival. At that moment, he thought that he would never miss the chance he had received. When the classes began, the young man stood apart from the others. One of the guys in this group looked at him and asked if this guy was really from another faculty, since he was seeing him for the first time. The girl who was sitting with him said that he was right, and then she added that he was quite cute. This guy told the girl not to act like that because she was being too picky about him, and she didn't think it was anything wrong. For the first time in his life, the young man felt other people's eyes on him, and it made him a little nervous. At one point, he even decided that it was just his imagination. At one point, it even seemed to him that all the students who were in the classroom were in anticipation of something, although it was an ordinary lesson. The door to the auditorium opened with a creak, and all the boys turned their heads to look. A teacher entered the classroom and had a book in his hands. He put the book on the table. The teacher said good afternoon to the students and said that his name was Jeffel and he would be teaching them a course on acting. This was Professor Lee Jeffel, a theater analyst known for his corn analysis. For 17 places, their acting will be subjected to a thorough analysis that will literally shatter the mind. But everyone said that it is his assessment that determines the success of an acting career. Therefore, the young man was very attentive to this subject and to the professor, who was supposed to teach them a course on acting. Besides, he was bothered by something else that seemed not entirely clear to him. He was bothered by the fact that this guy who was sitting not far from him was also present in the audience. The professor began his lecture by saying that the students had probably already heard a lot about him from their classmates. He said that they would drop the introductions and get to the main point. The professor said that the midterm exam on the subject will be replaced by 15 minutes, but 1 octave piece until this time. In all classes, there will be group rehearsals and demonstrations of the result. After the midterm and final exam will be engaged in the analysis of their ideas. The professor said that acting is not only a process but also a way to play naturally and sincerely, and gave the example of the film The Shining, which was released in 1980. The professor said that due to maximum synchronization with the character, and the more the character is not like him, the more difficult the acting is. He gave the example of acting in The Godfather, which was released in 1973. The professor came up to the board and said that this is why the topic for this semester sounds like this, and started writing on the board. Namely, the theme of the semester was to play something that was alien to him. He said that the students should be divided into groups of 6 people. At least 3 people should participate in the play. Students who would propose plays for production were appointed as responsible in the groups. The girl took all the words about the professor very emotionally. She started talking about how it was even more difficult than the tasks they had done before. The professor stood and looked at the audience and asked the students if they had any suggestions. But the students sat silently, not showing any sign. None of them wanted to participate in anything. The professor lowered his head down, looked at the table, and thought that he had thought that this year no one would show any initiative either. Then he said, if no one at that moment, one of the students interrupted him. It was that same young man who raised his hand and said he wanted to come forward for the original script. The professor was very surprised. Did he really want to present the original script with such a difficult topic? Well, despite this, the professor said that the young man could go out in front of an audience and present his concept. The guy didn't lose his head, said okay, and went out in front of the audience. He had never done such things before. The young man stood in front of the other students. He greeted them and said that his name was Yuman Yoda, in fact, from the Faculty of Management. The professor was a little surprised. Is this guy really a management major? Then why does he need a theater major? The young man was a little confused and began to say that he was a member of the Changcheon Central Theater Association. And he applied for this course because he is interested in acting. He wants to learn acting. He then added that he would work hard so as not to disturb the students of the theater specialty. All the other students sat and listened attentively to him. The young man immediately after these words said that he would like to create a play in which the main character would be Fred. He was referring to the very same lead vocalist of the world-famous group Queen, Fred Mercury. The days when his time was weak had not yet come. Fred met Jennifer, who became his lover and his soulmate all his life. Soon after their meeting, Fred gained enormous fame and wealth, but at the same time began to suffer from depression and alcoholism. One day, Jennifer learned about his new love and suggested that they break up. After breaking up with his girlfriend, Fred's mental state worsened even more, and then Tom appeared, who became Fred's partner until the end of his days, and yet Fred considered Jennifer his family and muse until his death. The young man said that what Fred experienced because of love is alien to him, so he wants to put his whole life into a 15-minute one-act play. The professor turned and looked at the young man and said that it was very interesting, and it turns out that there really will be 3 characters in this play: Fred, Jennifer, and Tom. The professor looked at the students and asked the rest of the audience who wanted to join in. Some students thought it sounded really interesting, and they would like to try it with this guy, but the grade depended on it. Somehow, it is risky to participate in the production of a student from another department. Suddenly, unexpectedly for everyone, the same guy with whom the young man's glances had crossed at the very beginning raised his hand and said that he wanted to participate. The young man thought that this was already a success because Soryushin would be on his team, and that meant half the success. Soryushin started his acting career as a child. He achieved the level of genius acting and became the leading actor of the corps July. And the most important thing is that it was because of this that he was waiting for this lesson. Last time he asked him if he really wanted to play a role because last time he was a member of Soryushin's group. So then the young man said that he sincerely wanted to become an actor, and he would try to act. They looked at him and smiled. Then he wanted to at least somehow start acting, and in front of the outstanding students of the theater and cinema department, he said that he wanted to play the role. The guys smiled because there were 2 people applying for one place and they didn't understand what to do. This guy said, let the one who can read the script better get the wheel. He looked at the young man with his huge eyes and told him to start reading the script first. Last time he demonstrated his performance to the team members and everyone listened to him attentively. Since he rehearsed at home tens or hundreds of times, his head was foggy and he didn't even remember how he felt at that moment. The guys were talking among themselves about how he played pretty well, but they thought it wouldn't attract any attention. And for them, it was a complete disappointment. It was at that moment that Soryushin said that it was now his turn and he wanted to try out too. The young man will forever remember the very feeling he had when this guy stood on stage. It was like magic. He was mesmerizing and attracted attention. It seemed that it was impossible to miss a single movement or word of his. People around said that it was just wow and they were delighted. They thought that this guy was just great with this role. Of course, Ryushin did a better job. When the person who would play this role was determined, and they did not decide what they would see next at the next meeting, the person had no choice but to agree, because on that day they were considered to have worked well. So Ryushin then said the young man that he thanks him for the game and that he really worked hard, but then he realized that AVP was playing at a level he had never even dared to dream of. But it was at that moment that he promised himself that one day he too would be able to play like that and also attract attention on stage. But the further he went, the greater the gap between them became. This guy had everything. The main role, the words of the interview. The young man had nothing. Nobody noticed him. And strangely enough, this time it was he who asked to join his team, which means he became interesting to him. And the guy decided for himself that this time he should show himself properly and not like last time, because he had the opportunity to be in a group with Ryushin and once again prove to himself that he is worth something. The first day of school came to an end and the young man returned home. He was lying in his bed and couldn't fall asleep for a long time. He was looking at the same point on the ceiling. The spirit of acting could not restrain itself and came as close to him as possible and asked him why he was not sleeping and what he was thinking about. The young man said that it was absolutely unimportant. There were just a lot of events today. Miho asked him again if it was really hard for him to, which the guy replied that, absolutely not. He had a smile on his face, and it seemed like this day was really successful for him, and he had achieved something. He realized that he had never experienced anything like this before in his life. People began to notice him, and he also met quite a lot of people whom he wanted to meet and whom he really wanted to work with. He also saw his parents again, with whom he had not communicated for a long time since he left home. For him, this was one of the happiest days. Then the young man looked at the spirit of acting and said that it was all because of him and thanked him. To which the spirit of acting replied to him, if he thinks that he did it only for his sake, then he is deeply mistaken. He should think better about his career. The young man said that he was thinking about his career. He was taking part in the production, but it would be a one-act play about Freddy. The spirit of acting asked him again if it was really about that same Fred about whom the film was made. The young man answered that it was about him, he was his fan, and he was very charismatic. He wanted to play him. The young man said that he would try very hard to show himself this time. The spirit of acting did not say anything. He listened to him silently. And then he said that if so, he would look forward to his performance, after which they hit each other. A week later, they were supposed to meet at the university to decide what to do next. The guys asked the young man if he had prepared at least one storyline for the task. They understood perfectly well that this was an original production, so it would take time to create the script, and if he needed their help, he would have to tell them. The young man was ready for this conversation and said that he just wanted to talk to them about it. Unexpectedly for all of them, he took a thick folder out of his backpack and put it in front of himself and the other guys on the table. The young man smiled and said that the script was ready and they could start working on this project. So Ryushin looked at the young man and then at the script that lay in front of him. He was very surprised. Then he took it in his hands and asked if this was not a plot, but a real script and if it was really ready. So Ryushin added that the young man must have a sensitive idea in his head, so directing would definitely suit him, to which the young man replied that no. While the guys were rereading the script, he told them that he himself wanted to play Fred. So Ryushin was very surprised if he really wanted to play Fred himself, to which the young man replied that yes, he was planning to give the script to the director and not touch it again. And then he added that the actors should be chosen after getting acquainted with the text. So Ryushin couldn't object to him. He sat silently and listened to everything that was happening. At some point, he felt uneasy and said that it was very funny, but usually in his group, he always plays the main role. And there are other actors like Hyasung. Her opinion is also very important. And there is also Suko in front. Now, there were 3 actors at once, and it seems that according to him, he was quite self-confident if you decide that he will be chosen for the main role in this group. These words made the young man a little tense. At some point, he even felt disappointed. He remembered how it was before. That everyone went and told Ryushin that they wouldn't wait for his performance and all the tickets were sold out. They were certainly very lucky. Odious is on par with Changchun, the best theater club of the university. If these 2 clubs gave performances at the same time, then they always went to Odious. Because it was considered that Changchun, to be honest, was very good. But in Odious, those who sought to act were actors and it was visible. And most importantly, they said that someone from Odious was filming in the new drama. And in that case, tickets really couldn't be bought, so the hall was always full. Odious's shows have always been extremely popular and have overshadowed Changchun. That's why the reaction of the lead actor, Odious Ryushin, was quite natural, but he said, well. And then the young man said that everything is known in comparison, and these words could not be argued with. So Ryushin looked at the young man and decided that he could really easily get around him because he was confident in his abilities. After this rehearsal was over, everyone dispersed around the university, each to their own classes. The young man was sitting in the corridor. He needed to be alone and think about what had happened. He didn't think that everything would go smoothly from the very beginning, but he also didn't think that he looked like a very bad actor. At some point, he even began to doubt his abilities and thought that charisma alone was probably not enough. The young man overheard a conversation between two girls who were walking down the corridor. One of them said that if her friend was free, she should go shopping with her. He raised his head and saw two beautiful girls. One of them said that she was going on a blind date and that her companion liked innocent people, to which her friend replied that she was at it again and she shouldn't get into trouble this time. She should play it off normally. Hearing these words, the young man was very surprised. Do people really play not only on stage but also in life? Do they play? It was at this moment that he thought that his charisma had grown and he was getting more attention than he had before. He was just not used to it. Now he needed to raise his image. The young man walked up to the mirror and looked at his reflection. To be honest, he didn't like it very much. He looked like a gray mouse. He had a new desire to change his image, but he did not understand how to do it. He did not understand how to improve his image. The only thing that came to his mind was that he would need to go to the center. When he thought about it, he saw a poster pasted on the window. He looked at the guys who were on this poster and thought that all this could be fixed. He remembered something. Namely, he remembered Young Min-hee, hair store. She was the queen of the fashion world who started her career as a stylist for popular groups and then became famous in the media. Thanks to lectures on how to create a handsome man around this time, she just owned a store near this university. The young man decided that he had to find her no matter what it cost him, and he set off on his journey. When he left the university, he walked along one of the streets that had the most shops. He stopped at one of the shops to read the sign that was above the entrance to this shop. It was written there that in order to choose a suitable image for an actor, you need an innate sense of style. This is exactly what he wanted to try. He understood that it was somewhere here. He opened the door slightly and quietly walked inside. He had nothing to lose. He needed to boost his self-esteem. He thought if he gets lessons from Young Min-hee, he will definitely be able to fix his image here. When he went inside, he saw a girl eating noodles from a can. She was a little surprised, but was glad to see at least one customer who came into her store all day long. She put her food down and said, "Welcome to the young man." The young man looked around and then said that he came here to choose a new beau. The girl smiled very sweetly and asked the young man what style he was looking for, whether he wanted something specific or whether he was still unsure. The young man asked her what style would suit him, and he wanted her to choose a style for him in her opinion. The girl looked at the guy and thought that this was even very good. This guy, in her opinion, started flirting with her. She came closer, looked down at him, and said it was clear to her what she would need to start with. Apparently, in her opinion, he looked very simple, and at first glance did not look like an actor at all. But she also thought that despite the fact that his clothes were very simple, they fit him quite well, which meant that he had a good figure. The girl went to the rack with things and started taking them out one by one. She gave him jeans and a t-shirt and also said that all of this should suit him. She looked at the young man and said that he could try on all these things in the booth, and that booth was over there. The young man held a lot of things in his hands and had no choice but to go into the booth and try on all these things. The guy quickly headed toward the fitting room. He wanted to change his image as quickly as possible. When he went inside, he thought that he relied only on her memories of the past. He was looking for this girl's shop day, and he was walking around all the time to near this university. He even thought that he was a little tired from searching for this store, but this did not bother him at all. He also understood that in order to meet her, he had to run around the university. At that time, he had already tried on the things that she had given him. At this time, the girl was sorting through the other things that she had for sale. She asked the guy if the size was right for him. The young man replied that it seemed so, but he didn't know if it suited him or not. The girl was a little surprised. Didn't he like what she chose? When he came out, she was pleasantly surprised because she herself chose these clothes for him, and it was not just good, it was real art. When the young man stood in front of her, she asked him if he was doing something specific. Well, for example, something like ballet, to which the young man replied that no, he's just an actor. The girl thought that he was posing completely differently from a normal guy. She asked him to spin around. She caught herself thinking that the movements of his arms and legs were not as graceful and trained as those of real actors. She wondered what he was doing. The young man told the girl that he would buy absolutely everything that she chose for him and what he was wearing. The girl said that it was very good because these things suit him very well. He has excellent taste. He shyly said that it was not so at all. The young man said that he would take absolutely everything that he tried on. It was a huge pile of things. The girl was even a little surprised. Was it really all that? She said that it would be quite expensive, to which the young man replied that it was absolutely unimportant. He thought she was very insightful. The young man said that he would buy absolutely everything that she advised him, and money had no meaning at all. He left this store with 3 huge bags containing the things he bought, or to tell the truth, the ones she advised him to buy. He spent 700,000 won in the store. At today's prices, you could probably buy 70 fried chickens for that money. He thought that it was the first time he had spent such a huge amount on shopping. At one point, he even thought about how he had at one moment lost his salary money and the money given to him by his relatives on the occasion of his demobilization. He thought about it so much that tears even came to his eyes. But then he calmed down, because he did everything right, because she gave him her phone number at the last moment and said that in any case, she would be able to take care of his image, and thanks to this he and Song Min-hee became very close. He walked and thought only about one thing, that now he needs to try to work on his image in this direction. He wanted to raise his image. His thoughts were interrupted by a phone call. He was a little taken aback because it was quite late. We stopped in our pocket to get the phone and thought, who could be calling him at such a time? When he took out his phone, he looked at the number, but that number didn't mean anything to him. He decided to answer this call by pressing the button. He said hello in anticipation of hearing who was calling him so late. He heard the voice of a young man who asked him if he was Yuman. The young man replied that yes. So Ryushin called him. The guy was very surprised, and he called him at such a time because he wanted to know why he wrote such a script. The young man did not understand what he meant and asked him about it. For him, this call was a big surprise. Time passed very quickly after the university class, and the clock showed 9:30. So Ryushin finished all the tasks that he needed to do the next day. He thought about the lessons in the specialty, preparation for the performance. All this was ready. He didn't even have time to lie down. Then he looked to the side and saw a script in his briefcase. He thought that he had completely forgotten about it. He decided that he should watch it. He was interested in what this guy had done in such a short time. He moved his backpack, took out a script, and placed it in front of him. The script was called Love of My Life. He thought that it was unlikely that a script written by a new actor would be outstanding or special. But still, this guy who wrote this script, he was full of energy at that moment. He remembered his words about how everything is known in comparison. So Ryushin decided that he would need to calculate this scenario as quickly as possible in order to draw conclusions for himself. And most importantly, he wanted to understand whether the script that this newbie actor wrote corresponded to his charisma. So he started reading it. He read it quickly, page after page, so that he could not tear himself away from it. When he finished reading the script, he immediately picked up the phone and started looking for the contacts of this new actor. He dialed his phone number and waited for someone to answer him. He couldn't contain his emotions. When someone picked up the phone, he asked again if it was Yuman and heard an affirmative yes. So Ryushin then couldn't help but ask why he wrote such a script from his voice. It was not clear whether he liked it or not. The young man on the other side of the line didn't understand this reaction either. He just asked again what he meant. Then so Ryushin told him that he was very excited and asked again if this was really his first script. And if this is really so, then he does not understand how he managed to write it so accurately and politely. He also added that while he was reading it, he literally felt the actors' movements when they spoke their lines, their body movements, their facial expressions, and even their voices. The young man listened attentively, and most importantly, he heard that he had done very well. And despite this, so Ryushin asked him again if he really still wanted to play the role. So Ryushin immediately suggested to the young man that they extend this performance to 2 o'clock and show it at the autumn performance of Otis, in which he will participate. The young man listened attentively. When he made his proposals, the young man replied that it wouldn't work out that way. He wasn't from their faculty and he wasn't in Otis, but the guy didn't get flustered and said that it didn't matter at all, because Otis accepts participants from other countries into their company. And then he added that he would give him a recommendation because he has talent, and asked if he had thought about changing direction from acting to dramaturgy. The young man could not resist and said that he had not seen his play yet. So Ryushin tried to explain to him even if he is good in acting, but he thinks that it is not as good as in drama. The young man told So Ryushin that they should talk once he saw everything with his own eyes. So Ryushin was very surprised by that conversation. He held the phone in his hands and didn't know how to react, because in any case, the role of Fred should have gone to him and he was wasting his time. It was evening outside. Floodlights were on everywhere, but there were practically no people. The shops were already closed. After this conversation, the young man stopped and thought that this guy was very wayward. He lowered his head and walked down the street. The only thought in his head was that while reading the script, he would definitely get the role of Fred. He walked and didn't notice how he bumped another guy with his shoulder. This guy started yelling at him. Is he blind and can't see where he's going? The young man stopped and said that he was asking him to apologize. When the young man raised his head, he saw that he knew this guy, and he was a little surprised that he ran into him on the street. This guy asked if it was familiar, but he didn't remember him at all. The young man said that he was Shin Yuman from the 31st set of Changcheon. This guy looked at Shin Yuman and clearly understood that he didn't know him. Then this guy racked his brains and raised his head up and then lowered it and said that he definitely remembered. After all, this was the same first grader who always sat in the corner and practically didn't communicate with anyone. This guy then turned and asked the young man because he was gone for so long. Everyone thought that he was skipping Shin Yuman, said that he was recovering this semester. This guy looked at the young man and said that his style had changed a lot. Most likely, he probably tried to seduce girls. Another guy joined their conversation and told him to leave the young man alone because he was clearly uncomfortable, to which Pak Hassan replied that he cared about him and nothing more. The guy said that where they were going, there were a lot of beautiful girls, and if he wanted, he could go with them. The guys, without thinking long and without waiting for an answer, turned around and went in the other direction. They said that they would see us tomorrow at the club meeting. Park Hansen was from the 29th set of Changcheon. The young man knew perfectly well that this guy participated in the theatrical social activities not because he wanted to act, but to pick up girls. He was picking on his actors for every little thing, so the impression he got on the day was not much better. Well, the most important thing was that the young man was very expensive when they asked him if he really wanted to be a professional actor. At that moment, he thought about it. And then this guy looked at him and said, is he seriously thinking about this because he is untalented and he will be the most professional actor, and does he seriously think that he will ever get a leading role? The young man remembered these words from the last time and never forgot them. He exhaled and thought that now they should see what he really was like. And the most important thing was disgusting that in this life these guys were the same as in the last one. The young man went home. The next morning there was supposed to be a meeting of their group where they were supposed to decide who would be the main character. The young man stood at the front door and watched as they discussed among themselves who was going to play the leading role this time. One of the girls said that Voneng was determined. The guys were discussing among themselves, and the guy said that he didn't expect anything else from Wonkan Hyun. When Yuman entered the auditorium, he saw the look of this guy who was looking at him. He turned to him, greeted him, and asked if he had really come, since they hadn't expected to see him here. The young man smiled and said good afternoon to them. He pretended to be glad to see Hansen Hen despite yesterday's conversation. The girl who was sitting next to Hansen asked him if he really knew who this guy was because in her eyes he seemed so cute. Heyman told her that they should get to know each other. This was Yuman, and he had been reinstated this semester. The girl looked at the young man and asked him what he wanted to become because he had such a good sense of style. Why did he want to be a stylist? The guy had a completely different opinion. It seemed to him that he looked more like a young village hen. Undressed answered them that no, he wanted to become an actor. Hansen was very surprised and even laughed when he heard that this guy wants to be an actor because in today's Real Madrid it's difficult. They only have newcomers and they all came to the casting. The young man smiled and said that he understood everything perfectly well, but everything is learned through comparison, and he was also ready to participate in the casting along with the newcomers. Hansen was no longer so sure of what he had just said. He looked at the young man and asked again what he had said. Two more students entered the auditorium. One of them loudly said that the directing department had arrived. One of the guys who was directing stood near the board and asked how the guys were feeling, and then let's add that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. The young man greeted them all and was very surprised. Hansen then turned his head and looked at him. Then he told the young man to show what he was capable of and thought that he could prove to them that he was not right for them. Hansen said everyone be quiet and ordered everyone to sit down. He said to introduce the newbies first, and the first one to introduce himself was Choi Cheol-du. He was in charge of directing this performance. He was from the 29th set. The second guy was much more cheerful. He raised his hand and said that he was the director and his name was Sa Jun-hin. This guy then added that in previous performances, he gnashed his teeth, looking at the evil director's department, and decided for himself that if he becomes a director, he will be understanding and kind. Then he fell silent, and a minute later said that he was still an assistant director and therefore decided to become the most evil thorn in the side in order to remain in history for a long time. This guy said that whoever is not ready yet can leave now. Everyone knew that this was the tradition of Changchun. And then the director said that there are already quite a lot of people who want to become members of different departments. They need to find their leaders and talk to them personally. And those who want to become actors should move to the front. A lecture will begin for them now. He added that Act 1 scene, one Kim Chul-soo is hanging on a building and washing windows, and his wife Lee Yeon-suk is cleaning other people's houses in secret from him. They meet by chance. During his work, the director immediately said that Hansen is in the role of Kim Chul-soo and Shin Na-hyun is in the role of Lee Yeon-suk, and told them to start. The director watched the acting and listened to how these two showed what he had written. One asked what she was doing there, and the girl did not know how to answer him correctly. It was clear that they already had experience and it seemed to be quite good. The director said that was enough and thanked these actors. Then he asked that Shin Yuman be in the role of Kim Chul-soo, and his partner was Bae Soo-hyun. The next moment, the director shouted, "Let's start!" The young man didn't rub himself at all. He understood that the introduction to the play showing the life of poor people in the 80s. Therefore, it was necessary to mix the feelings of anger, annoyance, and fear that he would not be able to hold the ropes on which he was hanging when we were out of the window. It was necessary to show the main character comically and at the same time sympathetically. Yuman began his dialogue by loudly saying whether he really needed money again, and where did the 1 million he gave her last month go. The girl looked at him, lowered her eyes, and began to justify herself. She said that she had made savings. No one understood what he was talking about. Yuman seemed to have been replaced, he insisted, and asked her if it was possible to use the money for everyday needs these days. Everyone understood that the atmosphere was completely different from what it was before. The girl tried to say something. She made excuses about how their daughter said she wanted to go to piano lessons. All the other students turned and looked only at the two of them. Yuman did not stop his game. He asked his partner in this scene how in real life he wanted to know, because she should have understood what situation they were in. The director didn't stop them. He listened attentively to everything that was happening. The only thing he thought about was that this guy had been playing something since childhood. A young man playing TS didn't understand that in this life, everything was happening to him absolutely not like last time. Everything was absolutely different, not like in the past life. His voice was carried to God through the air like a bird's song. His lines drowned out the energy of his partner in the game. It was just a reading, but it was completely different. It seemed like they were playing for real. On the street near one of the university buildings, there was a young man. It was So Ryushin. He was smoking alone. Not far away, he heard the voice of the guys. One of them was asking the other how he liked the game. These were two directors who were discussing the acting between themselves. One of them said that among them there was one who caught his eye, but almost Nia cannot be judged. Seo Ryushin continued to listen to the directors, saying that he needed to listen carefully and take a closer look at this guy during the casting. He realized that they were from Changcheon. The guy took another drag and remembered the words he had heard recently in one of the conversations about how they hadn't seen his game yet. It was at this moment that he clearly understood that this guy wanted to be an actor, and strangely enough, he didn't really like it. In one of the corridors of the university, Hansen met the young man. He told him that in his opinion, the young man was sticking his nose into something that wasn't his business. He started threatening him and saying why he was going all out at the first reading, because he was a second-year student and should just want to learn something and think about debuting in some minor role. This guy didn't understand why he was trying so hard and why he needed it. He scolded him like a freshman. Yuman answered him that he just likes it, so he tries and asked him for forgiveness, so that in the future he will be more careful. It was unclear because they weren't just amateurs. They were professionals. Why did he put pressure on the younger one? In fact, he wasn't that younger. Yuman understood that he had much more experience in this life, but he also understood that he should not have this chance if he showed his abilities. Then most likely he would calm down. The directors had a list of actors in front of them that needed to be seen at this casting. When the assistant director saw that Hansen wanted to play Kim, he said that this guy was clearly overestimating himself. The discussion of who would play the main character was taking place in the office of the Changchun Club. The directors saw that Shin Yuman also applied for the role of Kim this year. The candidates were incredibly ambitious. The director asked again, "Didn't this young man apply a year ago?" One of the directors kept thinking that this guy was pretty good at reading, and he thought that everything was possible, but the second one was talking about the first performance in the main role right away. It's absurd. He's only a second year. The director said that if this guy passes the casting, he will give him some significant supporting role. The assistant director looked at him and listened attentively, because the director thought it would be a good idea to develop this guy into a leading actor. The assistant director started to tell his manager that their Mr. Meticulousness might appeal to someone else and that he didn't like him. The director said that it wasn't so, but he wanted to know what Odious would be putting on in the spring. His assistant told him that most likely Hamlet and the leading role will be played by So Ryushin. The director looked at these two pieces of paper and said that if they had this guy playing, then the majority of the audience would go to him and it would be much more difficult to defeat them. The assistant director looked at his boss and told him not to worry about it ahead of time. The director wasn't so sure, but he was thinking only one thing, that they would probably have a chance too. The young man returned home. He constantly rehearsed. He read the steering wheel that he would have to play at the casting. There were words that were dedicated to her when he feels the same next to her as when singing. It was his script and his director. He read it again about the love of his life and at the end about how he loves her. But something was wrong. He reread his script again. It seemed that he knew this role by heart and he really wanted to play it. No matter how much he tried, it didn't even reach the 9th parody. There was no sense of sincerity. He didn't understand what he should do and how he should play so that everyone would believe him. The next day he went to the university where the casting and selection round was to take place. The first reading he was a girl who asked him what he was offering. The young man answered that he was ready to stay next to her all his life. The girl told him that she could not be next to a man whom she could not even hug. It was very cruel. He played and said that he knew it was selfish. Everyone around him was discussing that the young man had a very clear voice. Maybe he was lying, but he was a newbie in acting. The price they were playing continued. The girl asked him who she was to him. At that moment, the young man looked at her. He had such a transitory look. He said that she was the love of his life. And to himself, he thought, could he really go crazy? When he wrote this script, there was only one difficult place. He did not understand what a person feels when he is next to a kindred spirit, but at the same time experiencing attraction to another. He did not understand what confusion Fred was in then. He did not know and did not understand whether he was giving himself. And he didn't exactly understand whether he was experiencing maddening anxiety. Yuman thought that he still couldn't understand this feeling. When the reading of the scene was finished, everyone was delighted. Some of the guys were ready to clap their hands. One of the guys asked if he was really a newbie in acting. The girl added that he was very good. And then I thought for a bit, and she said that he was not inferior to So Ryushin at all, and it sounded like a compliment. But for the young man, it was not enough that he was not inferior. None of them said that he was superior to Ryushin. The guys consulted among themselves and thought if the forces were equal, then wouldn't it be better to entrust this role to an actor? It was proven that a newcomer can make a mistake during the performance. Many thought so, and said that it was not worth putting pressure on him. They consulted and decided that Yuman could perfectly cope with the role of Tom. These words really touched the young man. At that moment he heard the voice of the spirit of acting, which told him that this guy was very funny, and his charisma was incredible. The guys looked at the guy again and didn't understand what was happening to him at that moment. Yuman was very unhappy. He said that he would go out to get some air because he was nervous. Everyone agreed with him and decided to wait for him. Yuman left the office, leaving everyone else he was not ready to lose. So Ryushin silently watched him go. He understood that he had a real rival and that he was no worse as an actor than he was. Coming out into the corridor, the young man asked the spirit of acting why he was there and how long he had been there. He wanted to know if it was possible to not appear in front of others so that they could see him. The spirit of acting answered him that only he could see him, and he could only hear his words if he spoke only to himself. The young man put it on the table and asked, "Then it is not clear what he said about this guy." The spirit of acting told him that he wants to hear about that handsome guy again. And if this is so, then he has incredible charisma, and it seems to be about 75. The young man was very surprised, 75 out of 100. The spirit of acting explained that this is why even if a young person plays better, people will feel like they are on the same level. This is exactly how it works. Yuman thought about his words because charisma meant a lot for acting and for acting. The spirit of acting then asked him if he really wanted him to increase his charisma and said that he was ready to make him feel the same as Fred felt in this situation. The young man did not understand how he would do it, but the spirit of acting said that he had one condition. The young man asked what this condition was, but he was ready to do whatever he was told. The spirit of acting said that at some point he would have to do what he asked him to do, or more precisely, he would have to lend him his body. These words did not bother the young man at all. He was ready to do anything just to get this role. Yuman smiled and thought that he was so ready to lend him his body for a while because he considered Meho a good little. Because he thought that this spirit of acting that was now in front of him had done a lot for him, and he liked it all. He then thought that to give him a new chance, the spirit sacrificed its power and turned into a fox. These words that were just said about the young man's game, that he was not inferior even to Ryushin, really hurt him. So he thought that once he could give his body to the spirit of acting to use, the contract was concluded. In front of him was a sign that a contract with the spirit of acting was concluded. According to it, calls part of the memories of Fredo Mercury himself. Everything seemed to pass through him. He understood that Jennifer was his love, that it was impossible, that first you need to love yourself, and then what he asked for her not to leave him alone. The young man, when he felt all these memories, they were as if lightning had struck through his body. Memories one of one were used. He was warned that the resettlement of the spirit could not be refused. The young man seemed to have been in a completely different dimension. There were tears in his eyes. He was breathing deeply. For him, it was a completely new feeling. He had never had anything like it in his life. At that moment, a completely different thought was spinning in his head. If no one recognizes him, then what will happen then? For some time, he couldn't talk to anyone. He stood silently and tears flowed from his eyes. At some point, he thought that it was all wonderful, but this feeling was very familiar and he was hysterical. He realized that it was most likely anxiety. The guys who made the decision said that then the role of Fred will be played by Ryushin, the role of Tom will be played by Yuman, and Haesung will be played by Jennifer. So Ryushin looked at the script and thought to himself that he also thought that Hasan, would be perfect for this role. But he didn't understand how the first experience of acting could be like this. With such a newcomer's performance, he is in a very disadvantageous position, and if he takes the main role now, it means he doesn't even have any acting pride. Well, let it be an unofficial performance, but still, it must be on top and better than all the others. But despite everything he thought, he understood that he still wanted to get this role. At that moment, the door opened and Yuman came in. All the other guys were waiting only for him. The guys asked the young man if everything was okay with him. Something hurt him. Yuman replied that everything was okay with him. Then the young man came up to them and said that he thought they needed to have another reading. He seemed to finally understand what was going on. So Ryuman definitely didn't expect such a turn of events. He didn't understand what it meant to finally understand. The guy had nothing to offer, and he decided that he should keep quiet until he figured out what to do next. Then he said that it was good, and if the young man wanted it that way, then they were ready to listen to the reading again. The professor walked around the classroom and asked the students what the acting method was. He was interested in students who could answer this question correctly. The girl raised her hand. She wanted to answer the professor that this is a method of acting when the actor erases himself and becomes the character, embodying the role itself. After such an answer, the professor stopped and thought, judging by the theory, then most likely she was right. The professor took a few steps forward and said that usually it is given strictly speaking. The original meaning of the word method is a way or a technique. The professor began to explain that as the word method suggests, there are different types of techniques used to immerse the actor in the role. The most important thing in all this is the belt of the most effective and suitable option for the actor, and each actor should have a personal method. Then the professor added that not all students are still searching and must find a technique that suits each of them. It will be valuable, let's bet, in their future acting careers. He hoped that they would work hard and make an effort. Before this lecture last night, the professor sat for a very long time and sorted through all the letters that he had received in your mail. He usually did this every time, but this time he saw another letter from a student and it interested him. When the professor saw this letter, he thought that Team 1 had already sent him the result of their work. He wanted to see it. When the professor opened this letter, he was very surprised. He saw that the roles had already been assigned. The professor read everything that was in the letter. The most important thing was that Shin Yuman, who was the leader of the #1 team, contacted him. He sent the script and the roles of the team members. The main role in his script was to be played by him and Jennifer Ryushin. At that moment, when the professor was reading the distribution of roles, he thought that it was true that the role of something unfamiliar could only be played by the main character. But he didn't understand that they were adding such conditions even for supporting roles. What exactly were they trying to create? The professor said at the lecture that he had everything for today, and then added that for the teams that had not yet submitted their scripts for casting, he asked that they be sent by this evening. They should gather together with their teams for rehearsal. Even students majoring in acting find the subject method, acting, difficult. But despite this, team #1 decided to get together, and its leader wanted to take the lead role in creative plays to change the atmosphere in the class. The professor sat down on a chair and wanted to see how the kids were doing. They usually read an original work or a scene before watching the play. You can mentally imagine the acting and directing. However, there is imagination and reality diverged. Immersion can be easily destroyed, and it was the principle of the professor not to read in advance. Well, the professor hadn't been so interested in the play for a long time that he had been prompted to read his script this time. When the professor looked at their work, he said that they had tried well and thanked them for their work. Well, despite this, the guys were worried that there were only 2 weeks left until the presentation, and time flew by unnoticed. They discussed among themselves and thought whether they had made the right choice. No one expected that their leader would behave so decently. Just a few days ago, when they were choosing the role of the main character and when Yuman said that they needed to repeat their audition, so Ryushin answered him well. He agreed that they needed to repeat and said that in that case, he could be the first. So Ryushin started reading the script. It seemed like he really connected with this character. He talked about how he was a musician and that they should all see that he would soon be on all screens. He was very good at this role. Yuman looked at his acting and thought that his acting style was very different from how he played before. So Ryushin continued to play his role. He talked about how he could go out to his son with such inadequate skills because he was actually better. The ups and downs of this dialogue acquired clarity, and Freddy's inferiority complex was noticeable in his gestures. The guy was talking about how he would have preferred him to put him on stage rather than make him go through it. He demanded it, and he was convincing in his acting skills. It was truly the life force of a living character. The guys who were in the group at some point froze and silently watched him play. They were all enchanted by his playing. Yuman looked at him and couldn't tear his eyes away either. He understood that he had a strong enough opponent, and he would have to play even better than him. So Ryushin finished the line. A young man came up and he had to show a result no worse than this guy, but only better. So Ryushin told him that he can start because it is his turn now, and looked at Yuman. He was confident in his abilities. The young man agreed with him. He understood that so Ryushin played well, and now he just had to beat him. But the most important thing is that the essence of Freddie Mercury was depicted completely differently from how it was written in the script. Yuman sat silently for a while, looking at the script and preparing to present his version. Then the young man raised his hand and looked somewhere to the side and saw something unusual. All the other guys were perplexed. They didn't understand what was happening to him and looked at him. Even so, Ryushin believed him, turned his head and looked in the same direction where I was looking. The young man, well, when he didn't see anything, he asked him what he was looking at and what caught his attention. At this point, Yuman began to play the role of Freddy. He turned to Jennifer, who was exactly in the direction where his gaze was riveted. So Ryushin at that moment turned and looked at him because he believed that this guy saw something there. I looked at the young man and saw him talking on the phone with Jennifer. Everything seemed quite plausible. Yuman played so realistically, every move he made was justified, and it seemed like that was exactly what the main character did. Everyone imagined Freddie Mercury walking up to the window and looking at the sky at the very moment he was talking to Jennifer on the phone. He was so convincing when he spoke that it seemed as if without her he had completely lost sleep. He accurately played the essence of Freddie's personality. Because you couldn't just define him as a brilliant musician, he was definitely a person who struggled with inevitable loneliness all his life. And that was the essence of Freddie. At the end of Yuman, also the role of his main character that felt tears in his eyes, all this was quite true. Like, team number 1 was silent for a while. They really had a very difficult task ahead of them. They had to choose an actor for the main role. So Ryushin was quite surprised if he could then give the main character a life through this role. He thought that he should be exactly the same as him. The young man thought that he had seen enough in this life, but never seen such a stunning game. So Ryushin lowered his head down. He had nothing more to say. He understood that in this case the main role was not his at all. Because there was a guy sitting opposite him who was worthy of this leading role and no one else could play it the way he just played it. So the guy said that there was nothing more to discuss here. He was ready to admit his loss, but he did it very beautifully. The girl who was sitting next to Yuman at that moment, turned to him and asked what method he used when he played this role. The density and emotions were completely, but then at the first reading. The young man thought for a moment and began to say that he simply suddenly understood the feelings that the main character was experiencing, and that this was exactly what he used as a highlight. Before that, he never knew that it was possible to evoke emotions in this way, of course. Even if he evoked emotions, expressing them through acting is exclusively the ability of an actor. And I believe that Miho's abilities are important to us. He understood that he did not want to be an actor who was improving and using such ordinary methods. At that moment, the young man realized for himself that he no longer wanted to make such deals in the future as this time. The guys from the team were sure that they made the right choices. The main character will be played by Yuman, the leader of their team, And Jennifer will be played by Hyasun, but Seo Ryushin said that no, he was not happy with the further choice. The young man said that he didn't, despite the fact that he was a guy, he still wanted to play Jennifer. Everyone asked him what he meant anyway. The theme was to play something unfamiliar to oneself. In this case, the young man said that wouldn't it be better to show a wider range of acting skills by switching roles? You need to switch male and female roles to complete the picture. The girl absolutely agreed with him and said that it sounded tempting. After which the young man said that he was ready to show an absolutely convincing Jennifer, such as no one had ever seen before. The next day there was a meeting in Changcheon. The assistant director said that now he will start auditioning for her role. Yuman thought that Miho was already taking part in the roles of short plays, so there was nothing to be done about it. He would play the role of a dream of success only with his skills. The director said that 3 students applied for the role of Kim Chulsu, so he wishes them success and goes to the casting. The guys started talking among themselves about Yuman. After all, he was a second-year student, and the fact that he wants to play the main role is already a big deal. When Pak Han heard about this, he thought that the young man was just a bastard because he said that he would be careful, but he himself again pushed forward. The director said that they would now read Act 3, Chapter 4, where the main character, the reporter, would take turns acting out a confrontation scene, and then he added that he would act as a counterparty. The director said that Gu Wan-young should be the first to audition. The young man stood up and walked onto the stage. This guy in the theater world was recognized for his acting skills, but because of his appearance, he always gave up the lead role to the elder Cheolju. Since this time when the elder Cheolju was not there, the chance of getting the main role was very high. The guy went on stage and started playing the main role. He yelled at the reporter asking to save his girlfriend. The rest of the drama was played out. The young man fell to his knees, held the assistant director by the leg and said that he couldn't. The assistant director said to let him go. Didn't he understand? The main director thought that this guy was playing just amazingly, and he also thought that there was no need to continue. He understood everything. Most likely, he had been training a lot, and at some point he thought that it was time for him to play the main role. The first challenger finished his tryout. The next one was supposed to be Yuman. His opponent thought that he probably wouldn't be able to beat this guy anyway. The director said that now the time had come and that the man should begin his audition. At the beginning, everything was the same as in the first test. Yuman started to tell the reporter that he should hear him. Then he came closer and started asking him to save him. The genie grabbed the reporter by the hand. He told him in response to let him go. After which the young man sat down on his knees, grabbed him by the leg and held him tightly. He raised his head and looked at him. At that moment, he asked the reporter again, but there were tears in his eyes, and they looked just like real ones. The director thought that his acting looked natural enough and that he and the main character were experiencing the same emotions. Yuman was completely in character at that moment. He spoke like his hero about how people who praised him for saving someone during a risky job turned away from him. His voice became like the voice of a family man over 40. The assistant director asked Yuman because he was happy when everything went well. He thought it was very surprising. He behaves very naturally. The next moment, Yuman, playing his character, grabbed the assistant director's leg very hard and started shouting, "No, no!" Then he added, after all, he said that he could trust him, so he did everything for this. The assistant director looked at him from above, and it seemed to him that everything was happening quite realistically. The assistant director shouted for everyone to stop and kicked the young man so that he jumped to the side. The assistant director was surprised at himself. Did he really kick him too hard that the guy fell like that? In front of him was no longer an actor, but a natural hero of this scenario who continued to kneel before him. Even though he kicked the hero, the guy crawled to him on his knees and kept saying that at least they should explain everything to him as it should be. At that moment, the assistant director closed his eyes. He thought that he knew that this was just a game and nothing more. The guy in front of him was shouting that their Gina couldn't feel like herself even at school. There were tears in his eyes. The director's legs, which the reporter played, seemed to be tied to this place. He wanted to run away, but he couldn't do anything. He had only one thought in his head. He needed to somehow escape, but he heard this plea and could not do anything. All the other students who were in that room looked at that son and couldn't take their eyes off him. The main thing is that the director who staged this performance also did not stop him. He wanted to see how it would all end. At some point, tears appeared in his eyes, as well as in the eyes of the young man. He empathized with the main character. So the director nodded his head and said that it was enough for him, and he called the third contender for the leading role. The director called Park Hansen again, but the guy didn't know how to play now. After Yuman, he was angry with himself. During the break, the guys started asking the young man if it was true that he was acting for the first time. One of them asked if maybe he hadn't served in the army and had attended some acting school for 2 years. The director said over the loudspeaker so that everyone could hear the guys that the acting of the reporter, Kwok the director, was top-notch. The young man said that he was just diligently reading the script at home. The girl who was sitting next to him asked the young man again, "Is it really all a matter of practice? Some people don't get better even after repeated visits to their sons." And then she added that last year Hansan looked pretty decent, but you there, he looks terrible. Hansan himself heard these words. He understood that he had given up his position a little, but he thought that they themselves would try to play this role. "You even spent time in the club room, Changcheon." The assistant director said that Yuman played the best, but the director said that he and Wan Yan played on the same level. And then the director added that in their club it is not customary to give the leading role in the first performance. The assistant director did not agree with this at all. He became indignant and told the director, "Didn't they say in their second year that this damn tradition they have in their club is complete nonsense? And they would like to abandon it when they become seniors." He also asked if there was any point in pushing him aside just because he was too young. The director said that he admits that this guy has a sense of acting, but to assign the entire third to a newbie was not at all reasonable. The assistant director objected to him. "Okay, let's say this applies to the main role, but what does he think about Quack?" The director said the same thing. A reporter in a play can be designated as a supporting role, but in practice it is more like another leading role. And if they now give this role to a young man, then for him, a second-year student, it will be too much. The assistant director covered his face with his hands. He fundamentally disagreed with what the director himself had just said. The assistant director couldn't stand it and told him that it was because of this opinion and these actions that Chang Chun was losing to Otis. The director was very outraged and called his assistant a bastard. The assistant director said that he should remember So Ryushin, who first took on the lead role when he entered this university and is now the star of Otis. And the most important thing is that because of this damn tradition, they had to wait for the opportunity to play the main role until they became high school students, and all the time while they were waiting, they only heard that Otis is awesome and that there is no new face in their group, nothing completely new. That is why they are inferior to their competitors in terms of the charisma of the main actor and in terms of fandom. The director began to object that So Ryushin was still an actor when he was just a child, and the matter here is completely different. The director thought that Lin Yuman should first prepare well if he felt confident in the leading role. He would seriously consider him for the autumn performance. The assistant director then asked what role he was going to give him. The director grabbed his head and admitted that initially he didn't even think about giving so much to a newcomer, but at some point he changed his mind. He decided that he should be given the role of CEO of Nam. This would also be a big role for him. During the break, he met the eyes of So Ryushin, who was in the corridor holding a jar of water. So Ryushin didn't understand why he was sitting separately from everyone and decided that he should approach him. The guys who were with So Ryushin tried to tell him something about what happened in class. The young man told them to go without him. The guys were a little surprised, but they had no choice but to say okay and go to class. So Ryushin approached the young man and handed him a can of water that he had just bought from the vending machine. So Ryushin asked the leader in the group what he was doing here. After all, they didn't have a rehearsal today. Then the young man remembered that today there was a casting for the role in Changchun. Most likely that is why he is here. So Ryushin asked the young man how everything went and whether he got the lead role. Yuman answered him that no, he looked upset. So Ryushin then asked him if he got a supporting role, to which the young man replied no. So Ryushin was very surprised. He didn't even know what to ask him, and he asked then what he got at all. Yuman went into the hall. He brought a jar of water, opened it and took a sip. He replied that he had received something very significant. This was the role of an extra. When So Ryushin heard these words, he was perplexed. He didn't even know how to react at first. Then the guy shouted loudly, "Are they really completely blind and can't see what's going on around them?" He started saying that these bastards are completely crazy to give a secondary role to an actor who surpassed him in acting skills. Yuman answered him that he was fine, but he thought about what was going on again. Kvostov's seniority and experience, he lit a cigarette and decided that it should not concern him. Yuman thought that the guy looked like the main character of a romantic drama, and so groups in ordinary life. So Ryushin immediately turned his head to look at the young man and asked why he didn't completely switch to Otis. The young man said that he had already told him that he wanted to become an actor. Ryushin told him that he knew and asked for his forgiveness for that day. He was a little taken aback when he read the script. So Ryushin unexpectedly for himself suggested to the young man to become an actor. Yuman asked him again what he meant. For him it was somehow unexpected. Ryushin told him that it was only because the casting for the spring show had already been completed. If that was the case, then he shouldn't worry. So Ryushin began to explain that in Otis there is a system you go out, and he most likely did not know about it. Yuman asked again what kind of system you go out is. The guy explained that if the casting is over, but you are sure that you played the role better, you can make a battle, and if you win the battle, you can take this role. Yuman thought that it looks like the world of the savannah, but it sounds quite effective. Yuman said that he can't give Changqian a lift yet, and thanked the guy for such warm words. Yuman told him that this was his first official appearance on stage, and he thought that the role he was given was quite interesting, but this time he had to refuse. So Ryushin, when he heard your words, was a little stunned. He rarely made an offer to someone. That's why he immediately said that he thought he had a fighting character, but apparently he was still a pacifist. But he heard the answer that it was not necessary to create chaos. So Ryushin stood up and said that if he thinks so, then so be it. If someone has chosen their own path, there is no need to interfere with them. Then he said that in Otis's view, he's the main role and they both should work hard. The guys extended their hands to each other and shook Yuman's. They added that they really needed to prepare for the performance. Just a few days later, at the rehearsal in Changcheon, everyone was in shock. The actors were so tired that they lay on the floor during breaks. The assistant director asked them if they were really that tired. In the old days, they were driven 5 times harder, and they were happy about it. He also added that even if it is so hard for them, they should not show their fatigue throughout the entire performance. They need to say lines, perform various movements. Their endurance is never good. All the guys looked at him and thought that he was the devil who came to them in the underworld. The assistant director said they were almost done, and if they could get 30 seconds of vocals in, then he would give them some water. The very next moment, he shouted at them to start. The boys shouted as best they could. Then the assistant director, after giving his actors some water to drink, said that they now needed to line up. The assistant director said that acting is ultimately the expression of emotion, and the richness of acting is determined by how diversely and in what detail the emotions called joy, sadness, and grief are expressed. The assistant directors will not be looking at joy this time, and they need to practice expressing this joy in different ways. The assistant director also added that every time he clapped his hands, they would have to change the look of their joy. He wanted to check how many variations they could play. The assistant director raised his head and looked at the guys. He said, "So the first one will be after thinking a little." He decided that Shin Yuman should go first and told him to step forward. The young man stood up and took a few steps forward, and everyone else thought, wow, at least they could see what was coming. The assistant director thought that he had been watching him since day one. He did a good job reading the scenes, but it would be quite difficult to improvise. I remember very well that his elders scolded him for having the same style of play every time, and it was just a nightmare from the past. The girl remembered that she was scolded for what she had decided. If she smiles sincerely, then everyone will be happy. The young man approached the assistant director and asked him, "Can I use words?" He didn't know how to answer this question, and he froze for a while. Then the assistant director thought, wow, that's a really great idea, and said, well, there's no need to hold back and you can use words. The assistant director said it was time to start, and he got ready to make the first clap. Yuman stepped forward and started talking about being listened to. Then he began to continue that he knew perfectly well that it was a bit early to talk about it after only 3 meetings, but everyone around was surprised and didn't understand what kind of joy it was. Yuman stretched out his hands in front of him and pretended to open the box in which the ring was located. Then the young man asked if she would marry him. Everyone sitting in this group froze watching this scene. Everyone was speechless. And the only one who laughed was the assistant director. He asked again, married, and laughed even louder. Then he clapped his hands, and this meant that it was necessary to imagine the next joy. The young man knelt down and turned to his mother and asked if she recognized him. Then he made it look like he was holding his mother's hand in his hands. At that moment, he was talking about how today his mother looked straight into his eyes. Everyone understood that at that moment, he was next to his sick mother. The young man said that several months had passed, and he was well acquainted with the immersion and emotions for a short period of time, and he could play them. Today, a few lines were allocated for the supporting role. The time of appearance was also very short. In order to show genuine acting and play in this short moment, you need to immerse yourself in the role in an instant. Of course, it is rare for a supporting actor to do this, but he always tried to do it. He thought about the fact that in his 15-year acting career, he had received a total of 1,321 supporting roles. These short moments that he played were the only chance for him to demonstrate his acting skills. That is precisely why he could never afford to slack off. That is why he has now very sincerely transformed himself and played the role of a loving son who sits next to his mother's bed, holding her hand with his own. The assistant director clapped his hands again, which meant it was time to play the next emotion of joy. The young man imagined that he had won the lotto and was holding that very lottery in his hands. The next clap and he tells you to put 2 pieces of dried kelp in the ramen. Another clap, and the next emotion is the young man turning to his dear one, whom he sees only in the photograph in front of him, and telling that their son won first place in school. The assistant director wondered if this was all normal. At this point, he would have run out of ideas. But it was not in this case. The director extended his hand forward, saying that it was enough. Well, the young man was already showing the next emotion. The assistant director was perplexed. Did this guy really have anything left even now after so many shorts? The young man said that yes, now the players are making the coach happy. I score goals. The assistant director said that no, that's enough. Right after Yuman, the young man looked at the guys and wondered who would be next. The guys started talking among themselves that it seemed like this guy was doing well, but it was unclear why the assistant director stopped him. The girls said that they wanted to show them a newcomer who would play the worst and make them think. And here something happened, and she laughed at this moment. The assistant director said, although it was apt that joy is the same, if there are 10 situations and 10 characters and emotions can be expressed in 100 different colors. Then the assistant director said to applaud Yuman for his great performance. He did not hold back his emotions. When the young man sat down in his seat, one of the guys asked him if he really played according to the script. Yuman answered him that some roles were taken for real, and the scene, and some were improvisations. The guys were interested in how long he had been considered a script. The guy answered that it had been his hobby since high school. The assistant director stood there and thought that Choi Chul-ju should be watched for his acting today. It's a pity that he can't convince him with his acting skills. The assistant director said that now they needed to try one more person, and he thought about who to choose. He looked at all the guys and decided that he wanted to see Park Hansen. The guy wasn't very happy with this choice, and he didn't want to go out. It was a beautiful morning outside. Everything around was covered in smoke, and the smell was carried straight into the apartment. There were many sheets of paper scattered on the young man's desk. This was the last script. Yuman, despite the fact that he had to wake up early and start working that day, slept like never before. He thought he needed to sleep for another 5 minutes, so he covered his head with a pillow and didn't want to hear Miho waking him up. But despite the fact that his head was covered with a pillow, the spirit of acting could not leave him alone. He woke him up with his paw. Miho told him that he asked to wake him up at 7 o'clock because he needed to train. The young man still couldn't open his eyes. He only yawned. Despite the fact that he really wanted to sleep, he still got up and went to brush his teeth and tidy himself up. As he stood in front of the tombstone mirror in the bathroom, all he could think about was that next week we would have a short play presentation day. He certainly understood that with Miho's help, he was able to easily understand Fodi's most complex emotional arc. But for acting, it is not enough to simply immerse yourself in emotions. He understood that the ability to express different feelings was also necessary, because in the short play, there are 2 decisive moments when Freddie undergoes significant changes in his personality. When from a boy obsessed with music after his first meeting with Jennifer, at that moment, he turns into a young man who sincerely wants to communicate with other people. And the most important thing at this moment, we have conscious treatment to Tom, they only to Jennifer. This is the very part where his personality fluctuates. And this is the so-called turning point in his life. All of this he had to play in this short play. The script describes that for about 33 seconds, he slowly turns around. His facial expression and actions change in slow motion. This price was specially made. I know that it will be difficult. The young man, after washing himself, sat down at the chair, lay down in front of him, and thought that he had not thought at all that a week before the performance, he still would not succeed. Miho sat opposite him and watched as he worked on this price. He always watched him carefully. Miho couldn't resist asking him if, judging by his size, things were really that bad. He suggested that the young man improve his acting skills. Yuman stroked him and said that thank you, but in this situation he doesn't want to do it. Miho didn't understand and asked again why. The young man said that he wants to improve himself. The most important thing is to use the cheat code. Miho realized that he couldn't sign any contract with him now, and that's why he kept silent. But regarding another matter, he asked if he could give him any advice. The young man gave advice, but only if it was direct help, then he could give it to him. Miko answered him. If he helps, then his energy will slightly transfer to him, about 2 units of charisma. The young man wondered whether he needed this and why give charisma as a reward for help, but both were good for him. But he understood perfectly well, looking at the spirit of acting, that both at the beginning and now he seemed to be paying some kind of price. So he decided no and shook his head. He didn't understand what he was thinking about before. Well, despite this, the young man said okay, and he would be grateful to Miho for this, and they clapped their hands, and Miho said that the deal was concluded. The contract was concluded. The spirit of acting gave him 2 more charisma, the young man wanted to know, and so what should he do? Miho began to say that first of all. Then for some reason he went silent and showed 2 screens on both sides in front of him. The spirit of acting asked him to portray Freddy's last expression on one screen and Freddy's first Gnosis joke on the second. He asked him not to Filoni. The young man thought for a moment and immediately showed the first expression that Freddy had. And then he showed the second expression he had as a young man when he was not yet confident in his abilities. Miho said that everything is correct and ready. Now he has to look at it carefully. Then the spirit of acting said that if you do it like this and broke the state from when he is smiling to the state when he is upset into many frames. The young man looked at them carefully and saw how his face changed with each subsequent frame. The spirit of acting said that he should look at all this after memorizing the intermediate processes of facial expressions. He needs to try to play them frame by frame. The spirit of acting looked at the young man and was pleased with what he offered him. Then he turned around and asked if the young man could do the same thing as before him, only do it alive. At that moment, the young man thought that this was a completely continuous movement. It was just a sequence of specific movements. And if this is really the case, he understood how he needs to play his role. He must cope with it. He sat so late that he looked at his watch and realized that he was already late and he should hurry up. The young man shouted that he was going to university and he had no time at all to continue this conversation. The spirit of acting remained in the room. He knew that in any case, his concentration was simply amazing. He couldn't believe that this guy was doing 3 o'clock. The spirit of acting did not know how it happened that at 3 o'clock he first gave Yuman a chance and raised his charisma to 54. And then this time he gave him 2 more charismas. Now if he has a little more time he can get his. Miho was no longer the little fox that the young man had seen. He knew for sure that he would get his. At the same time, at the university, before each presentation, I tried to read my role and transform into my character. When the guys saw the leader of their team, they were a little surprised at how well Grimm suited him. She even told the commander that the young man suited him very well, and he thanked her. At that moment, everyone was so busy preparing and they were all doing their best, no worse than professionals. Some were deciding what kind of lighting there would be, others were doing makeup. Well, of course, so Ryushin stood out the most in this group, since he had to play the female role. Russian looked simply amazing. Looking at him, you could say that he was beautiful. He really transformed, and it was unbearable not to notice him as a girl. Yuman also couldn't take his eyes off him. The makeup artist asked the commander to look at her. Yuman thought that he had just laughed, but at that moment, he got goosebumps. He clearly understood that his face and gestures were not as usual. Of course, he really was an excellent actor. Yuman turned away and thought that he also needed to concentrate. Even if it was a short play, it was his first leading role. And also it was his first performance on stage and he had to show a good game. And so the presentation of their productions began. Someone said that the performance is given for 15 minutes after one team finishes the show. The next one will have 2 minutes to prepare. They asked that they prepare everything in advance and keep track of the time. The professor looked at the children and said that they needed to go in order. At that moment, he thought that if they started with the first group, their success or failure would affect the subsequent productions. So the professor thought for a moment and said that they should start from the end. The first one would be group number 5. Their production was the most ordinary and there was nothing magical or mysterious about it, just like the next production. The professor made some notes in his notebook to announce it to the students later. He thanked group number 2 for their efforts and said that group number 1 would be the last to perform so that all the guys would get ready. When everyone was ready, they would start. The first thing they did was play one of Freddie's Mercury songs on a very old tape recorder. It was a song, You Make Me Livin'. It said that every time the world is cruel, it asks you for forgiveness. On stage, a young man was sitting on the floor. The song continued to play. He was also sitting there. Were such words that she makes him live because she is his love. The main character raised his head and began to talk about how day after day, death was getting closer and closer to him. His body was on fire, but his mind was absolutely calm. Everyone who sat in the auditorium and could have watched this performance watched it without taking their eyes off it. At that moment, Yuman was really Fred Mercury. He talked about Tom and Jennifer being with him every day, and he doesn't have that emptiness that he had in the days of greatness. Then he took the bottle from the table in one hand and clenched his other hand tightly into a fist. The music got louder and louder, and it was his music and his song playing. At that moment, he was telling himself how he could get in touch with his son with such data as his. Then he coughed loudly and took a few sips of wine. He felt better. The young man fell to his knees and said warmly that it would be better for us, son, than for him to drink himself to death. The professor looked at him without taking his eyes off him. He understood perfectly well that this young man conveyed emotions well. Not only with his face, but also with his body, he worked as he should. Then Yuman fell silent and turned his head to the side as the music continued to play. He saw Jennifer in front of him, played by Rehearsing. She was beautiful. The girl approached him very slowly. She was so beautiful that he could not take his eyes off her. The music continued to play, and they stood with their backs to each other, each of them playing out their experiences. The young man was deeply disappointed and slowly changed his facial expression. Then everything was as if it were in a movie. He played out each of his shots with a new emotion that he had. After the disappointment, he was surprised. He didn't say anything, but everything was clear from his face, and you could read everything. At the last moment, when he turned around, his face was already shining, and he was smiling at Jennifer. The girl turned her head in his direction when she saw everything that was happening. She thought that this was still. Everyone who was in the audience started talking to each other that it was really cool. For a second, it seemed to them that it was a movie. Everything that was happening was like in slow motion. The professor thought that it was really a level. The professor was pleasantly surprised because he couldn't even imagine such a thing. Could it be that he sharpened the intermediate movements? Of course, if you initially keep a neutral face, it is easy to smile. But why bother changing your smile to crying, since these expressions involve different muscles? This part was probably not easy for him because the first and last expressions were radically different from each other. The spirit of acting, seeing his performance, I thought that he really mastered it. He was great. For 15 years of an unremarkable life, in which he was drowned by the success of others, he tried his best to move the way he wanted. It was unclear whether he had really learned to control every muscle in his body. Thanks to the efforts of energy that was previously barely noticeable, it now overflowed, elevating his figure and eclipsing his opponents. This was the aura of truth of a brilliant actor. At the end, he raised his glass containing wine and shouted to the audience, "Everyone dance!" Because he's throwing a party to celebrate the success of their tour, and he's going to throw out anyone who doesn't get drunk. At this moment, according to the script, he was supposed to see another person who was in his life, namely Freddie Mercury. It was that same Tom guy who said that he really liked the show, and he would definitely look forward to his new performances. Then this humble guy extended his hand to him. At that very moment, when he shook this guy's hand, he realized that something had happened in his soul. He looked at his hand for a long time and wanted to feel the same thing that he felt in the previous moment. This was a completely new feeling for him, and he didn't know how to feel about it. He turned away but kept his hand near his heart. At that moment, he wanted to shout out that he still loved Jennifer because she was the love of his life. The color was right on him, and the young man was talking about Jennifer. She was only his. Freddie Mercury and Jennifer stood on stage looking at each other, and he already understood that everything was not so simple. It was at that moment that he realized that it wasn't just me that seemed to him, but that it was in fact that he was attracted not only to her. Then Jennifer said that she knew everything perfectly well, but would like to pretend that it was not so for the rest of her life. It was the most intense scene when he talked about how he had never loved anyone as much as her and asked her to stay with him. He said that he was selfish, and this was a request from a naive, insanely. Then he was no longer so persistent but asked her to please stay. He called her his love. At that moment, the girl just laughed at him, despite the fact that she had once loved him too. Then she just turned around and walked away in the other direction as quickly and as far away from him as possible. The guy was left standing alone, absolutely alone in this world, just as he stood on this stage. He asked her for forgiveness and said that she knew that it had become the love of his life and asked her not to take it away from him. A tear rolled down his eyes. It was so realistic. And at that moment, he was saying that she didn't understand what this could mean to him. Many of those present with him also let Lisa in. The guy said that whenever the world is cruel, it is for her that he forgives him. The professor was not mistaken in that he staged this play himself last. He was also delighted. Freddie's last words to Mercury are that she makes him live because she is his love. The first one who started clapping was the professor. He couldn't help himself because he believed him. Then absolutely all the students who were in the audience began to applaud. The young man thought that for the first time such a storm of applause fell upon him. He bowed. He was grateful to them. He understood perfectly well that these were still the same hands, legs, gaze, but the world now had completely different colors. The professor turned to his students and said thank you all very much for your efforts, and that he would give them detailed comments after the midterm assessment. Then the professor called the young man and said that the position of a professor obliges him to be impartial, but as a spectator, he is ready to tell him, because it is impolite to remain silent and the work is worthy of all praise. The professor said he was grateful to him for showing him the best method of acting technique in his life. The young man thanked for such words and bowed low. So Ryushin was a little surprised that the professor could really say such a thing. After all, they had literally hit the jackpot. At that moment, when everyone praised him, including the professor, the young man wanted to see how Ryushin reacted to this. This young man said that he has learned a lot and is no longer surprised by anything. Because he debuted at the age of 7, he learned something much earlier than everyone else. And most importantly, if an actor does not build a solid foundation for himself, then sooner or later he will collapse. He said that everyone praised him and called him a natural even at that young age. But his skills did not come so easily to him. He carved them into himself like stones because they were the result of his debt and persistent efforts. At that moment, he turned around and left, because this genius who stood on the stage easily turned his years of work into dust. So Ryushin looked at the young man and thought if this really was that genius. He clenched his fists because he was never used to giving up, and then he would put in even more effort to win it. The spotlight was burning very brightly, which meant there must have been some kind of event here. To the side, there was a separate shelf and a hanger where there were a lot of clothes. The event was supposed to be with Nuna. She was the main participant and the main heroine of it. The young man came at her request. She was very happy that he was already here. She thanked him for coming and for taking the time. The guy said that everything was fine. The midterms were already over, and he couldn't ignore Nun's request, so he had to find time anyway. Besides, she was paying 100,000 for the part-time job. The girl shouted at him that he was a sycophant and spoke very beautifully. Then she turned and said that she was ready to introduce him to the people who would be with them today. First, she introduced her friend Angie. This is today's client. Next to her was Min Ke. This was the cameraman, and he was also Angie's cousin. The girl said that she is a designer of the Rococo brand, which is being launched this year. Today, they will work on filming the fall-winter collection. The girl said that this is a nice young man and their model today, and his name is Shin Yuman. Then she said what she already said, since he is a newbie actor. Everything should be done so that his identity is not revealed, because this guy does not want to be labeled as a model before his debut. This was a good idea. Designer Anzi approached the young man to see what size he was and what his completeness was. She immediately said that the trousers should be size 32, only a belt would be needed. She said that his body is proportionate and looks good. Only it was necessary to know how tall he is, most likely 1.78 meters. The young man answered that yes. The girl asked the designer when the female model would arrive. Angie answered her that they had contacted them some time ago and were almost there. The designer was a little scared and wasn't sure that this guy would succeed, because she's a budding actress, she's cute, but she asks suspiciously little. If only she hadn't spent all her money on fabrics, then of course she could have hired a professional. At that moment, the door opened and someone in a very quiet voice apologized for being late. Everyone turned and looked towards the door. There was a girl standing in front of them who told them that she had come to the shooting. She was simply amazing. Yuman thought to himself that he had already seen this girl once, but she looked a little different. She introduced herself and said that her name is So Suyeon, and she is an aspiring actress and works with the Gaeon agency. It was the main character drama he took part in right before the rebirth. Well, then she already looked completely different. The young man thought she was simply delightful, and seeing her right here now, he thought maybe she was different when she was younger, because he had heard that she had an arrogant and determined character. But immediately after this girl arrived, everyone understood that she was an ordinary shy girl and that it would be very difficult on the set. This was a problem that most likely needed to be taken away and perhaps a replacement found for her. The designer said that she had very little time and needed to get ready as quickly as possible. The model hurried. The operator was not happy with her work. He constantly made remarks to her and told her to get it together. The designer understood that they had been filming for an hour and there was no point at all. They didn't know what to do because the actress couldn't even look at the camera. When they took pictures, they realized that the young man looked much better than the aspiring actress. She simply asked for forgiveness. The young man asked for a 10-minute break. The operator did not know which angle was best for him to watch from. When the lights were off and no one was paying attention to them on stage, there were only two people left, the young man and this girl model. Yuman looked at her and asked why she was so worried. She didn't answer. She sat and tears were running down her cheeks. It was completely unbearable. The young man thought to himself that he felt very sorry for her, but he couldn't do anything about it being a human being. She was such an impressive actress that even her fellow actors became her fans. When he saw her, he understood that she had a shining appearance, ambition, everything, especially charisma. To make sure of this, he watched films, dramas, and broadcasts, and even interviews with her participation. The director who recently shot the film praised Soo-yeon for her deep immersion in the role. Then he asked what her secret was. The girl then said that her mother was very strict. She then told me that fast food, carbonated drinks, cartoons, movies, all of this was strictly prohibited, and she could not even imagine that she would play with friends after school. Then the young man thought that most likely it must have been very difficult for her. The girl talked about how she spent her free time fantasizing a lot when she became an actress. These fantasies became reality. It was so nice that she couldn't help but immerse herself in it head first. Then she also talked about how cola was like a breath of fresh air for her, as if after it she became drunk. For her it was something like a symbol of freedom. Yuman remembered everything she said and understood how it affected him further. When the spotlights came on the next minute, he realized that he had very little time. The guy turned around and handed the girl a handkerchief. He said that it must be hard for her and she should wipe away her tears. The girl thanked him. She said that she was very sorry because the filming was delayed because of her. Then the guy took out one of the cans of Coca-Cola and said that everything was fine, but a sip of cola should definitely refresh her. The girl held the can in her hands. She thanked the young man, and to herself she thought that she was drinking cola for the first time. She wanted to take at least one sip as soon as possible. She wanted to know what this cola tasted like. When she took one sip, she thought that she liked it very much and she couldn't even contain her emotions. The young man asked her if she liked this drink. The girl was simply delighted. He said that he could help her for this. She should first close her eyes and then he would help her to immerse herself in the filming as if she were playing. The girl had no choice but to believe the young man, and she agreed with him. He told her that she should first imagine in her mind a white dot, a very clear white dot that would disappear if any memory or information was absorbed. Then her memories and past moments will gradually be absorbed by the expanding ones. At the same time, everything present is completely erased. And after a while, she was sitting with her eyes closed, and everything around her was glowing. At that moment, the young man told her that she was now surrounded by complete emptiness, and that she was feeling this emptiness again. But in front of her, there's a certain castle. It is an old but clean castle. He said that one should look at the people who are in this castle. When she went inside, she felt that there were no people there at all. She was alone in this castle. The young man said that she has been living alone in this world for 20 years. She just dreams of friends who she will most likely have over time. And when she lived in this castle, she felt that one day, her very first friend decided to visit her in his most beautiful outfits. She began to impatiently wait for his arrival. Then he told her that she had to guess what kind of person it would be, and after some time, her friend finally appeared in front of her on a horse. When he saw her, he said hello to her, and now she should open her eyes and greet her friend. The girl opened her eyes and saw a young man in front of her. There were no more tears in her eyes. She smiled. The first thing she did was greet her new friend. At that moment, the young man told the director that filming needed to start right away. Everyone didn't understand, but they decided that it would be better this way. The cameraman thought that the atmosphere seemed to have changed, and he needed to start filming immediately. When he pointed his camera and saw the picture, he saw a completely different actress in front of him. She was no longer afraid of the camera and looked with her head held high. She was beautiful. And after a while, she could no longer cry as she had before, but laugh. The shooting day came to an end. The designer thanked her models for their work and said that they had done a good job. Designer Anzi said a big thank you to the young man. The operator added that he really is amazing. Was it really hypnosis? The guy replied that it was a method of imagination that is usually used in acting. Thanks to imagination, you can immerse yourself in the role. Why did he add that the girl is an aspiring actress, one of those who can immerse themselves in a role well? And she herself thought that thanks to this guy, she was able to live the role in front of others. Until now, she had only succeeded in this when she was a tutor alone. She stood to the side and looked at the young guy who had just helped her. She wanted to know who this man was because he was so kind to her. and he was able to help her. He was confident, handsome enough to attract attention. Yuman went straight home after filming, and when he came in, he told the spirit of acting that he was already home. Miho immediately asked him from the doorway what he was doing today, and it seemed to him that he met someone who had strong energy. The young man said that this is the same actress, so Suyeon and he must remember her. It was the day when he first saw him on the set. She was the main character there. The spirit of acting said that she had a delicious energy. The young man asked again what it meant deliciously. Does he really feed on the energy of people, the spirit of acting? He said that he cannot do this without permission. Just feed on the aroma that the actor exudes during the game. The guy asked again, what does it mean he can't do it without permission since they signed a contract? Which means he can feed on his energy. The spirit of acting said that they had not signed such a contract actually. He gave him a lot of energy. So he walks around the set to replenish his reserves. At that moment, he bit his finger. The young man asked him for forgiveness and then said if they had already signed a contract, then he was offering to share his energy. The spirit of acting said that he could not do this. It was not a fair contract. What the spirit of acting just told him made him think he didn't understand anything. The spirit of acting said that according to the laws of the universe, each contract must be mutually beneficial, and his current proposal is based solely on goodwill towards him without the desire for his own benefit, which means the contract itself cannot be concluded. The young man thought there must be a stricter rule than he thought. Their conversation was interrupted by a phone call that buzzed in his pants pocket. The young man took his phone out of his pocket and looked at who was calling him. He was a little surprised. He thought when he saw that tomorrow he would definitely go there for the first time in a long time because he really wanted it. The very next day, he found himself in this very place. In front of him stood a man who clapped his hands and said that it was quiet now. This man greeted the seniors who helped on today's excursion to the Hummingbird Theater. The seniors lowered their heads and thanked this guy. This guy said that there was one day left until the performance, and while everyone was busy preparing, the seniors should behave as quietly as possible. They agreed and decided that they would quietly follow the leaders. The first place they entered was a huge room. It resembled a workshop for sewing clothes and making props. Then we didn't go any further and didn't see a guy with a folder in his hands and two more who were discussing how things would happen. Then, as they walked down the corridor, they saw that everyone was trying to do their own thing. But among them was a disgruntled woman in glasses. She was yelling at the employee and watching everything around her. Then she turned around and shouted at the guys who were very close. She told them to come over. One of them said that he was already coming. This woman in glasses said that time was running out and they only had one lighting technician. She asked what they would order to do. In fact, the assistant engineer suddenly ended up in the army. She didn't understand why they didn't invite another one. She said that the technician they had left was not all powerful, and he couldn't handle all of this alone. The guys were watching all of this. This theater has consistently held the position of the best theater in Korea since its construction in 1908, and everyone knew it as Haijodan. This theater was managed by the leading domestic company, and its interior design and equipment were top-notch. It was so demanding to choose actors that it was not the greatest purity in an actor's life. Therefore, the court sent a fairly large number of applications, but very few of them passed the casting. The young man decided to take a risk, and this was the only way he could get into this company. He took a few steps forward, greeted the manager, and introduced himself. Yuman said that he has experience working with lighting and equipment and he can be useful to them. One of the managers asked how long he worked with light, and not just with light but with stage light. He also knows how to handle it. The guy said he had experience working with steam and profile spotlights. This woman who was screaming so loudly in glasses did not lose her composure and told the young man that at that moment she was thinking up a task. Then she added that in the bag he should take gob under number 43 and insert it into the fastening under number 14. The young man did not lose his head. He headed to Who and the very bags where he was sent. When he opened the bag, he saw many different objects, but he said that he couldn't get confused. Then he thought that first he needed to put the filter in the lip holder. Then the young man knew he needed a light map. He looked and thought that this was probably it. He took it out. Look up. He saw that spotlight number 14 is the one that is currently illuminated. Having placed a ladder near this spotlight, he climbed onto it and inserted into it what he was asked to. This woman with glasses was surprised, but she didn't say anything. She just took a deep breath. Then she approached this guy and said that she was a lighting technician, and who was he? The other guys were even more surprised because they understood that he really knew about lighting equipment, and everyone was interested in who he was. The guy introduced himself, said his name, and that he entered in 2000. Then he said that they could call him whatever they wanted. The lighting technician said, well, until they find a replacement, he will have to work hard. After some time, the work began, and he already worked in this theater as an assistant lighting technician. When the lighting technician turned on one of the lamps, he was surprised because the light was not on. He took off this spotlight and gave this spotlight to the young man, who took it into his hands. The lighting technician asked the young man if he had ever worked as an electrician. The guy replied that he had not. He was simply interested in this area. Yuman understood that if there was a constant shortage of something in his pipe over the last 15 years of work, it would be difficult not to learn a related profession. The lighting technician asked the young man if he knew how to operate the console. The guy replied that he knew how to turn it on and off. Then the lighting technician told him to go to the machine and started calling out the numbers he would call. Yuman got into the apparatus for the first time, but this theater was empty. When the lighting technician saw that the guy was in the control room, he started shouting that 3912, a plump young man, raised the lever to control the lighting under these numbers. After some time, the lamp lit up and light appeared. Then the lighting technician shouted 03, 76 9 12 30. The young man and these floodlights of light became very much. The lighting technician said that this time it is necessary to turn off 27 28. The atmosphere on stage changed depending on the lighting. The light falling on the empty wall was simply amazing. It was this play of light that he saw at that moment that he understood that this was the mastery of a lighting technician. The lighting technician was pleased with his work. He no longer screamed and understood that he was completely ready for the upcoming performance. After some time, they were sitting in a cafe not far from this theater. The lighting technician told the young man that he was doing quite well and that he was better than most of the assistant technicians he had. The young man thanked him for such words. A theater worker asked if he was responsible for lighting in the corpse or if he wanted to work in the lighting field. The young man replied that it was not so at all. He was a novice actor, and the lighting technician was a little surprised by what he said. The young man said that he wants to become an actor at Seoul National University and play the leading role in the main hall of Sujongdong. Everyone knew that even leading actors were wary of performing in places like this, and this guy hadn't even graduated from college yet. Among the many theaters in Hejeongdong, he chose the Grand Theater, the largest and most luxurious one. Well, the most important thing is that the words of this young man did not seem like empty words at all. The lighting technician said that it was a pity that he wanted to take him as an assistant, but if he wants to become an actor, then it is unclear how he knows how lighting works. The young man lowered his head, took a sip from his glass, and said that he thought it would help him if he studied in many areas. He wanted to master absolutely all acting skills with screenwriting sound. Lighting work includes all these dramatic elements to create atmosphere. The theater worker looked at the young man. He was very pleased to hear this, and he said that he could show him Hyejandan if he wanted to. Yuman, of course, wanted this. He was so happy that he shouted, "Hooray!" Then he asked to exchange numbers with him. The next day, a rehearsal was scheduled at the university, and the guys started rehearsing. Individual lines could be heard. This was one of the most intense scenes where one of the actors was on his knees, and the other was yelling at him that he was a pathetic worker. And now, in this scene, the assistant director who played one of these roles also participated. The assistant director turned his head, looked at the director, and asked if they should hang him at that moment. The director started yelling at the guys because they had to say lines that weren't spoken more vilely. He was talking about how they as a man should crush this guy with their courageous spirit. These two actors thought that he was starting up again. The director said that they couldn't do it. He was very sorry. Then he said that they probably didn't understand how many people would like to play this role. If he didn't put all his efforts into it, it wouldn't be fair to them. The guy with blue eyes lowered his eyes and said that he won fairly, and he would try. Then this guy came to the table, took the script, and he was thinking about what he was going to do in the next scene. At some point, he closed his eyes and thought no matter how much he thought about it, he always felt like he was playing this role wrong. At some point, it even occurred to him that he should also refuse this role because he didn't feel it at all. Then for some reason, he stopped and thought that he didn't need to hurry. Maybe he could still succeed. On the table, he found Yuman's script. For some reason, he thought about this guy, and how he showed various expressions of joy that he demonstrated during the rehearsal were truly impressive. Since there was no one around, he thought he could take a little look, because if this notebook was lying on the table, then maybe there was some kind of clue there. When the young man opened Yuman's notebook, he was very surprised because everything in it was completely unclear. There was so much underlined and highlighted in this notebook, and most importantly, he changed so much that it was simply impossible to read. Yuman came up to him from behind and asked what he was looking at. The young man almost stuttered and even jumped a little. He had no choice but to start making excuses. He started talking about how he was going to check whose it was and return it to its owner. The guy with blue eyes handed it over and asked for forgiveness. He was so curious that he even read a little. Yuman replied that it was nothing to worry about and that he shouldn't panic like that. The guy raised his head. He was surprised by such an answer. It was completely unexpected for him. Unexpectedly for himself, this young man shouted for Yuman to help him with this role if he could. They both left the room. The young man asked if he was afraid that he was not living up to his role. The guy replied that he was. At that moment, the young man thought that this guy was talking about his role as a subordinate to the president of the company, a role he played in his past life. He was a newbie then and couldn't portray the role well enough to bring it to life, and since he was already in debt to the role, he thought he should help it out. A young man asked a guy when he hears the phrase serial killer what image comes to his mind. The guy asked him again what he meant. Then he thought for a bit and began to say that in the eyes of such a hero there should be a gleam of madness, huge dark circles under the eyes, shaggy hair, a squinting look. The guy thought for a bit and said that this is exactly how he imagines this hero. The young man put his hand on his shoulder and said that if he could imagine it all, everything should work out for him. And then he said that they need to go and check whether this is true or not. When he asked for help, he didn't even think about what they might tell him, and most importantly, he didn't know how he would get this help. Another movie screening ended in the cinema. People who came out were discussing and saying that the movie was really, really good. Some of them still didn't understand who the killer was in the end, and most importantly, everyone admired the acting of the actor who played the main character. Yuman and the young man with whom he was talking, and with whom he also decided to go to the cinema to watch this film, said that it was very cool. Yuman asked Sunho how he liked this movie. The guy immediately replied that he was a very cool director, actors, everything was just top-notch. Next, Yuman asked who he thought killed the protagonist. Sunho thought for a bit and then answered that in his opinion, it was most likely Park Hoil. At first, he didn't think about him because he seemed completely innocent to him. At that moment, the guy thought about it. He didn't expect an answer to this question from himself because just recently he had spoken differently. When Yuman asked him what image comes to mind when he thinks about a serial killer, he described a different image to everyone. He then thought for a bit and said that this person should have a crazy gleam in his eyes and under them a huge dark circle and shaggy hair hiding his face. Yuman turned his head and looked at Sunho. He understood that the guy would definitely change his mind now. So the young man at that moment told Sunho that there is no suitable role if the role is one that the actor cannot handle. After watching this film, they decided that they should continue their conversation in a cafe and headed there. When they weren't sitting at a table in a cafe, Yuman asked Sunho what the name of Mr. Nam's second subordinate was. The guy answered that they called him Chulson. Right after that, Yuman asked the guy again why Chulson started working for Nami. Sunho remembers the script well and answered that this guy had no education, but he needed something to live for. Yuman also asked one more question about what he did before this job. It was necessary to understand this hero, so Yuman also asked why this guy did not go to study. He asked question after question. He wanted to hear how this guy felt about Mr. Nam. He was also interested in whether Chulseong still had moral sense and what kind of relationship he had with his first subordinate, Sunho. At that moment, she realized that he couldn't answer him even one question. He thought that he had thought through his hero's past in his own way. Yuman saw that the guy couldn't tell him anything, so he suggested that he start with 1%. Yuman explained to him that he needed only the process worse between him and the role he could not be sure, but explained that in it, there should be at least something that will be the same for them. At that moment, Sukno thought about his words. He really needed to find something that would unite him and his heroes. He remembered the whole script and thought that there was a part in which Subordinate 1 and Subordinate 3 beat up Kim Chul-soo and the second one stands guard. When he read it, he also thought why the son was like that. And maybe his hero is soft-hearted after all. Only now he realized that his hero didn't show it on the outside at all, but inside he felt sorry for Chul-soo. He couldn't stop it himself and didn't want to take part. That's why he decided to be on guard. Yuman, when he heard his explanation, thought that it was impressive to draw such conclusions from a short passage. It was just super. Yuman added that this is how a hero is born, based on skin and a drop of imagination. There is no need to overdo it in rolling out your chest or hitting. He said that you just need to pick the right outfit and create your own Cheol-sung. At that moment, Sukno felt like an actor. He understood the essence of how he could play this role and make it suitable for himself. A few days later in the auditorium where the guys from Changchun were rehearsing, They were doing a run-through of their performance, and the guy on stage was talking about why he was so excited about the boss's orders. Another guy who was on stage asked Sukno, maybe it's worth putting him in his place and what he thinks about this. Sukno put himself into his role and responded to the actors who were on stage so that they would not overdo it because the boss did not give the go-ahead for this. The director told his assistant that Sukno was playing better today than the previous day. His assistant also noticed this and said that the guy's tone of play had changed. Sukno answered them that yes, it seemed to him that he could not make the character three-dimensional because he had hammered into his head the image of a stereotypical gangster, and that is why he tried to change something. The assistant director was very surprised, and he said that he just looked at the first subordinate like that. Did he really have a reason for this? Sukno answered him that yes, the second one had his own moral standards. Sukno tried to explain that he believes that in his eyes, the first real freak is the most that is not the trash of society. The assistant director asked what his opinion is based on. The guy replied that in all modern ones, his character always retreats when it comes to something immoral, and the second one distances himself from it and also rarely swears. Until now, he thought that his character was not a little murky, but in fact, this is his peculiarity. The assistant director listened to him until the end and said that their Sukno grew up because he understood everything himself. The guy answered them that it was not quite so. Yuman helped him understand this. He asked him about it, but the main thing is that he figured it out himself. The director asked the guy again if Shin Yuman had really helped him. It was a big surprise for him. Sukno didn't understand why the director changed his expression. He asked if something was wrong. The assistant director answered him that now everything was clear to him, and Yuman was doing a great job with the role of the senior director. The director, unexpectedly for all the other guys, said that it was very good that they had finished rehearsing today, and he was letting everyone go home because he needed to correct the script a little. The assistant director also stood up and began to escort everyone who participated in this scene to the exit. He asked them to leave this audience quickly. When he raised his eyes and looked at the clock, he was very surprised the clock showed 7:20. Then the assistant director opened his phone and shouted to the entire audience that they had won at rock, paper, scissors. Then he continues that Oedipus performs on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, and they will perform on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. The director said that this is a great relief. The director thought that preparing for his son on weekdays might be difficult, but the later performance would be 100 times better. The assistant director said that he completely agreed with him and that now posters and tickets could be printed. After which the assistant director said that they had perked up a bit and now it was time to finish writing the script. And he also said that in act number 3, Mr. Nam orders the second son to deal with Kim Chul-soo, but the first ones object to him. He thought that he should give this act to the second one. The director said that all of Hansen's lines should be given to Sukno. The assistant director said that he initially put a spoke in Hansenum's wheel because he acted strangely, but now he has improved. Even the content of the lines is more suitable for Sukno. The assistant director continued to say that he thought everything was still over, but when they noticed how he figured everything out himself, the director objected to him because he himself did not figure it out. Yuman helped him. These words slightly discouraged the assistant director. He even fell silent for a while because he didn't know what to tell him. Then he pulled himself together and replied that he didn't understand what was going on here because it was quite normal that the senior helped him study the character. The director was indignant. What did it mean, normal? Because this guy Yuman was the first time he was going on stage. Not every newbie can teach. The assistant director told him not to bother and not to look at the details. It is necessary to evaluate the entire production, taking into account the interrelationship of the characters. This son is more suitable for Sukno, and he himself knows this very well. The director agreed and said that let it be so, and also added that it was his turn to express his opinion. And he started talking about how he thinks that Mr. Nam's role should be reduced, since when Chul-soo runs into him, he is on the verge of death. The assistant director was surprised. The director said that he had already asked Yuman 100 times not to stand out, but he continued to be a troublemaker. This was having a bad effect on the production. His assistant did not agree with this at all. He objected that it was not at all about the dramatic component. Yuman was doing a good job with the steering wheel. The director infected, he said that the actor should be able to adapt to the main character, and he thinks that standing out alone is not good at all. The director got so angry that he slammed his fists on the table. He didn't understand why Yuman kept popping up everywhere. Even when he learned about the incident in the theater, he held back and said nothing. But interfering in the performance of other actors like this is simply unbearable. The assistant director grabbed his head. Of course they had difficulties, but they were not so global, however. Every time it came to Yuman, the director made a scandal. It was unclear what kind of cat ran between them. The way the director feared the young man suggested certain thoughts that Yuman could turn out to be better than he was during his prime. He himself did not know this and was not ready to admit it for anything. The assistant director thought that this was very wrong, and there was no point in holding back the newcomers like that. He couldn't hold back and said that in order for us to get a lively character, we need to portray him in such a way that the real one can be seen. If the protagonist is on the verge of death in all the scenes with him, then it would be right to achieve color in his character. The assistant director said there were only 3 weeks left, and it should work if they made the right decision now. He was very surprised. He understood that the director was suggesting to crush a person who was doing a great job in order to stage a mediocre performance. He didn't understand, because they all thought that they wanted to stage a great production. And most importantly, he didn't understand what the difference was between them and the elders. These words really hurt the director. He fell silent and could no longer object. Even at some point, he lowered his eyes. He really felt that he was doing something wrong. His behavior was wrong. After all that was said, the director said that the assistant director of the department should do as he knows. But if it doesn't work out, the responsibility will fall on him, and he will also have to fix everything. And that's what they agreed on. Time passed very quickly, and the day of Chung Chung's first performance arrived. There were quite a lot of people in the hall. The director came out to them and greeted them all. The guys were happy to see him. One of the girls turned around, looked at him and said they say Oedipus was sold out. She asked if he was expected here too. He was walking. The director grinned and said, of course. Of course he understood that Oedipus was sold out because they had fans. Even if you think about the fact that their main actor is now playing better than him, where is the guarantee that this will continue to be the case? If he gains experience, then of course he will do without other professionals. The director told them to enjoy today's performance, and if there were any shortcomings, he asked them to give them merciless criticism. The director thought about what he heard that director Sunbai Baek Lishin would come to his performance today. And if he showed him that he was good at acting and directing, then the viewing would definitely go according to plan. At that moment, another young man entered the building. He didn't pay attention to anyone because he was talking on the phone. The director, hearing the voice of this young man, turned his head and realized that Baek Lishin was already here. He thought that this was very good news for him. He would be able to show his work to that Sunbae too. Baek Lishin, when he finished talking on the phone, saw the director and said that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. To which Cheol-ju replied that he was very glad to see him and thanked him for coming. Baek Lishin said that he was here to see him and at the same time to see if there was gold among the copper. He wished him luck in the performance. The director thought that he made a good impression on the senior back. Look at the pastor. The director realized that for the first performance, such a number of spectators is a pretty good result. He turned his head to the side. He was very surprised. He definitely didn't expect to see this guy here. It was so Ryushin he also came to their performance before that he had never come to their performance. The director was even very surprised at one point because many of those who came to this performance had never come to their performance before. The director thought that this guy would most likely remember him. He was very pleased. The director's assistant director went backstage to the actors who were preparing for this performance. He clapped his hands and said that he wanted to see them here. Then, as expected, the director had to say the last word before the performance. He said that they should try not to be too nervous and, most importantly, that they should not forget their lines. Then he also said the most important thing is that no one should improvise, because if they start doing this, it will upset the balance of the entire performance. The last words concerned only one person. He said Yuman. He thought that he was attracting a lot of attention to himself. And at the end, the director told all the actors that their time had come, and they had to impress everyone, he shouted forward. The curtain very slowly began to open, and actors appeared on our stage. One scene of the play was replaced by another. It seemed that the play was going very smoothly, and did not particularly touch anyone alive. Baek Lishin sat in the front row, watched the play attentively, and thought that Chang Chun's style remained unchanged. It was too ordinary, and the actor's individual qualities did not stand out. Even at some point he got bored. He started to fuck. He thought, did he really come here in vain? But everything changed the next moment he heard the voice of one of the actors who said, "You are here, brother." This actor was very confident on stage and spoke his lines so that he attracted a lot of attention. The way he behaved on stage was completely justified, despite the fact that he was not the main character, but he still attracted attention to himself. Baek Lee-shin immediately raised his head and stood to watch this actor on stage. He was interested in his every move and every line. He sat right in front of him and didn't understand where they got this guy from and what he was all about. He saw this actor for the first time. It was clear that he was professionally engaged in acting. All the scenes where he was talking on the phone or just talking to other actors on stage, he was still the only one who attracted attention. Baek Lee-shin at some point thought that this was a new concept, the concept of Spider-Man, and it worked pretty well in this performance. Isn't it great? He thought he played the everyday hero Spider-Man. This actor's voice was very soft and clear, and he attracted attention. And also the character that contrasts with this softness, he was completely different, and the whole character was built on contrast. When this actor was talking on the phone, he said he has an agent. If not, can he introduce me to him? His facial expression was cunning and acting that could not be hidden even behind the smile that was constantly on his face. He looked and understood that even if the main character is just standing, attention is still drawn not to the main character, but to this guy. Baek Lee-shin clearly understood that this guy, whom he saw for the first time, was stealing all the focus of attention to himself. It was not easy to notice. It was something more than that. It was unbearable to tear your eyes away from it. And in the next scene, when he was a little different and must have been very aggressive, he stole her in this scene for his own benefit. The play was over. All the actors came out on stage to take a bow. Everyone knew that the role of Kim Chul was played by Gu Wan-young, Kang Seok-ho to reporter Kwak's Aurora. In the end, the only actor worth watching was Mr. Nam as the company president. Even without expression, he seemed cunning. So his natural demeanor is not very favorable. It may be difficult for him to play other roles except villains, but considering his acting skills, it was already something. At that moment, it was announced that Yuman was the president of Nam. Baek Lee-shin remembered this name. Yuman was very pleased with how he played his role in this performance, and he was even more pleased with how the audience looked at him. He even felt a little shy. The director stood at the end of the auditorium watching everything that was happening on stage and how the audience was reacting to his performance. Right after the performance, he thought that Lin Yuman had hinted to him that he should maintain balance, so he decided to call him separately and have a serious talk about it. His thoughts were interrupted by Baek Lee-shin, who was hurrying towards him. Baek Lee-shin turned to Cheolju. He said that he really liked the performance despite the fact that it was the first performance and the audience gathered decently. Despite some mistakes of the actors and staff, the performance was really very good. The director also understood that everything went well and thanked Sunbae for such warm words. After these words, Baek Lee-shin said that he wanted to ask him about one thing. The director said that he could ask about anything he wanted. At that moment, he thought that he would finally be offered a promotion. But what he heard puzzled him a little. The conversation turned to Yuman. He wanted to know what faculty and what year the actor who played Mr. Nam was studying in. He was also interested in his acting experience, whether he was seriously involved in acting, what level of acting skills. It can't be just a hobby. He is aiming for a professional career. Then he stopped at our place and said that even that is not true. Where could he meet him? Baek Lee-shin asked the director to introduce him to this young man. After some time, they approached the dressing room and knocked on the door. Yuman didn't understand who was there. He told them to come in, but he was very pleased that they wanted to meet him. When the door opened, Baek Lee-shin came inside. He said hello and said that he thought the young man was very talented. He wondered if he was thinking about becoming an actor. The guy came in and said that he was a graduate of Changchun University. The young man was very surprised, stood up and greeted his guest. Baek Lee-shin asked him if he had heard of the theatrical production. In July, he works there casting director. Yuman didn't understand why the graduate answered him that of course he knows about this production, and it seems to him that every actor, even a beginner, knows about it. Baek Lee-shin then told him if he was interested he could audition for their theater troupe. The young man thought that it seemed like in his past life he had a somewhat contradictory character when they crossed paths. Yuman turned his head, looked, and said that he was auditioning in July. This is not a little bit, not going to his plans. July, it was corpses that so Ryushin was the main actor in his past life. And also July was the top 3 corpses by Seoul standards. Besides, she is one of the few that can only hold on through regular performances. Of course, the young man was very surprised in this life. He was offered to go to a casting in this particular group, but he already had a completely different opinion. He bowed and said thank you very much for the high praise, but he does not want to become part of the corps. These words surprised Baek Lee-shin very, very much. He rarely encountered a situation where one of the aspiring actors could simply refuse him like that. So he asked why, if he wanted to lay a good foundation for the play, he had to belong to a theater troupe. The young man said he had made this decision after careful consideration. And then he added, if in the future he had an interest in joining a theater company, he would definitely come to them. He knew for sure that over the last 15 years he had learned everything he needed to learn in a theater company. In this life, he wanted to freely choose and passionately participate in any production, be it theater or cinema. P. Lishan was very surprised. He stood silently for a while, but he understood that this guy's words were quite balanced and weighty. But still, he did not lose his hope. He thought that in a short time he would contact him. If he wanted to cling to the corpse, further actions could aggravate the situation, so he thought that it would be better for him to retreat. Pek Lishan handed over his business card and said that it was great and he should not forget about his promise. The young man thanked him for his understanding for the business card. Pek Lishan asked him another question, but it was purely professional. He asked the young man how he had worked out the facial expressions of his boss. At that moment, he thought that this was his usual face. The young man replied that he could portray a dispassionate facial expression or something else. A second later, he raised his hand to his face and looked completely different. He was very pathetic. And after another second, his face was completely different. He could superimpose one emotion on another and show it the same way. Pek Lishan was very surprised because he did not understand how this guy could keep his face and not take off the mask he showed during the whole time on stage. He looked at him as a completely different person and thought how this was even possible. He had a lot of questions. The director was very upset. He didn't understand what had just happened. Pek Lishan had rejected him and gone to look for Yuman. He thought that no, the only thing that stood out about him was his acting, which is probably why he wanted to talk to this guy. The director thought about the fact that he should become an actor. He is not at all suitable for a director. Besides, the July theater troupe is always lagging behind, so it was not a good option for him. He understood that the path of the theater elite begins with high song. While he was standing and thinking about how to proceed and what to do, he saw a young man approaching him. He raised his eyes and was surprised that it was So Ryushin. He didn't understand how to feel about it. So Ryushin didn't say anything to him, stopped for a second, looked at him and said that he was simply blind. The director didn't understand why he said that. Then So Ryushin said that the actor who played the role of CEO Nam was simply incompetent. If it were up to him, he would have given him the main role. And he also added that he can't believe that he doesn't see the true value of this actor. In many ways, he is too good for Chang Chun. These words upset the director even more, and already behind the scenes before the final performance, he shouted at everyone at Shin Yuman. He said that in his opinion, the young man didn't care about his instructions and didn't take him into account at all as a director. The director said that he had already told him more than once that he did not stand out on stage. He should be the same as everyone else. His assistant grabbed him and said that he didn't understand that this was his last performance. The director continued to shout that if he couldn't handle the balance in this performance, he wouldn't leave it like that. Soknu approached the young man and asked if he was okay. He didn't understand why the director was behaving like that. Even when he said that Yuman had helped him, he still behaved aggressively. Yuman was calmer than ever. He said that everything was fine, there was no need to pay attention to him. The guy was a little surprised. Yuman continued. He talked about the fact that the director still can't get up on his son during the performance. So he's not in any danger, and he'll play the way he wants. At the end, the director said that he would like to express his gratitude to the audience who stayed with them until the last moment. He thanked them for being with them, and then said that if they wanted to take a photo with the actors, they should come to the front. When Yuman heard these words, he still didn't understand that he would have to take the most photos with the audience. And he also didn't expect that So Ryushin would come, and in his hands would be a huge bouquet of flowers that he brought him for playing in this play. The young man, of course, thanked him and asked if he had watched the show to the end. So Ryushin answered him that yes, he had watched it to the end. Yuman asked the guy again if he came here to analyze the play Chang Chun, to which he heard the answer no. He came to see how only one actor performed. He was not interested in this performance. He was here only to watch one actor. The young man was very pleased to hear such words. So Ryushin told him that his acting was very good, but he hoped to see him in all his beauty next time. He said that he wanted to see him among where the conditions would be more favorable and the scenario would also be much better. At that moment, he turned around and started to leave. On his part, it was an offer. After these 3 days were over and they showed all the performances, the actors had to take apart the price for which they played. In the hands of the young man, there was a hammer. He took a few hits at the props as the performances were over and it was time to prepare for the next ones. After the first blow, he thought that in his past life at the age of 23 after his first performance, he cried like a little child. He was very sorry for the destroyed stage, and he was also very sorry to let go of the role he played. He also felt very sorry for all his colleagues with whom he was on stage. They were dear to him. But now he did not experience such feelings at all. He was unexpectedly calm. He felt only a little bitterness for himself. After the regression, he follows the same path. The supporting role with Shang Chun became a kind of test for him. Miho gave him enough charisma, but he still could not trust himself. Previously, he did not dare to voice his complaints, even if the payment was meager. He was afraid that he would not be called for the next role. He was afraid that his role would be taken by a newcomer. And yet he found joy in filling the void left by those participants who succeeded. He understood perfectly well that in his past life he was just an unknown actor whom no one knew. He was a gray mouse. However, when he played Freddie Mercury and received Otis's offer to join, he gained a firm belief that he was different from his former self. Well, what was left for him in Changchun was to pick up a hammer and destroy the very stage on which he played. He picked up the hammer and struck one blow. Then he struck another blow, 15 years of gratuitous time filled with passion and love for acting. There was a tribute of respect for the actor's first daughter left here, but nothing more. At that moment, he destroyed it. And when he destroyed it, he realized that he did not want to pay for his past. He decided that he should end up feeling sorry for himself, otherwise he won't succeed. At that moment, the assistant director called him. He said that he was a good boy and played the role well. Now they need to get ready for the party. Yuman said that he would miss it for the guy. It was a big surprise because not everyone was waiting for this party after the end of the performance. Then the guy said that it was okay. He would tell them that Yuman was not feeling well. The young man thanked him for that. The assistant director said he seemed frustrated before the performances, and he should have done more to stop the director from getting emotional. Yuman thanked him, said that everything is fine, he knows, that he also worked very hard. Then he lowered his head and said that Chang Chun lost a good actor. He dragged on and added that there was no need to be sad and that he should stay in touch with him, and when he was on stage, he should send him tickets. Yuman answered him that if he gets a good job, he will treat him to a drink someday, and that was the decision they made. The bus was racing along the Yuman highway very quickly. On this day, they invited me on a tour of the theater. The driver said that the next stop was 3X and passengers going to 3X should get ready to get off. Yuman raised his head, looked ahead. He saw a forest, which meant they were almost there. He knew perfectly well that this forest was right in the center of the city. He hadn't had a good rest at all lately. He thought that today was the time to take a breather and relax a little. He went to the door of the bus, pressed the stop button so that the driver could see, and he stopped the bus and opened the doors for him. The young man got off at this stop. He was going to look at that very sun who every actor dreams of with her life. In front of him was that very Haejongdan. This was his chance to see what it was like inside. He thought even when he came to the performance as a spectator, he felt that same sensation that stirs the blood. The young man raised his eyes. It seemed so beautiful and pompous to him that he could not tear his gaze away from it. He also saw a poster and he realized that a national theater festival was currently taking place in the theater, and it was quite a grand event. The young man thought that if there were any tickets left, he would be ready to see the performance after the tour. The spirit of acting said that he also agreed with him. It was very tempting. The young man saw the box office and decided that he needed to go up and inquire about the availability of tickets for the performance. I went to one of the box offices. He said hello and asked if they had tickets for today's theater festival. The girl said that the play Temptation was already on, and they only had one show left at 7:30 p.m. She asked if he wanted to buy a ticket. Yuman was a little surprised that there were tickets left for him. It was unexpected that they weren't sold out. He handed over the money and said that he wanted to buy one adult ticket. The cashier told him to hold the ticket and enjoy it. Young man, you are very pleased. He couldn't even imagine that he could just buy a ticket to the festival and didn't understand how there were any tickets left. After all, talented troops that had passed the regional selection participated in the National Theater Festival. This festival was so popular that the tickets should have been sold out long ago. Miko told him that he was just lucky. At that moment, someone called him. The young man stopped and turned his head. It was the lighting operator who promised to give him a tour of the theater behind the scenes. This guy came closer and asked him if he had just bought a ticket and was going to see the show. Yuman answered him that there is a theater festival there now, so he is going to see it after the excursion. The guy said that he could have just told him and he would have gotten him this ticket. Yuman answered him that it is not worth it for the excursion. He is already very grateful to him. The guy said that today he plays the corpse of Hyundai. It will be a performance of temptation. He felt a little sorry. The young man did not understand why he said that. Then the guy told him that he had heard that many theater groups boycotted the festival this year due to a conflict with the association, so the overall quality of the selected groups had decreased. The young man said if it's true, then he doesn't understand anyway because this play is based on a bestseller. Then the guy said that they were saying that the script for this performance was completely bad. The young man understood why there were tickets left. They went inside. Yuman asked where they were going now. They walked along a long corridor. The guy told him that he would show him the back of the price. When they opened the door, he said that this was a warehouse where stage props were stored. Wandering a little further, they saw another room. It was a conference room and a recreation room. Entering one room, he said that this was a dressing room for actors and that high-quality cosmetics were laid out here. The guy asked if they could go and watch the show now. Yuman answered him well, but before that he asked where this stage was leading. The guy answered whether he was really interested, but the scene he was asking about connects this place. And in fact, this is the calling card of Hunjongdan. This is a special hall of the Sujongdan Theater. The young man was surprised when he got to this stage. It was so huge and pompous, but he really liked it. The guy didn't lose his head, pushed Yuman forward and told him to go up on stage. Yuman had never been to such a big sun. He was a little nervous, but the guy said that there was no one here, and he was not worried. He stood right in front of this stage. He only had to take one step and he was already on it. He had this feeling that he was actually going to step onto this stage as an actor. He thought that he needed to take the first step so that he would feel that he was already standing on this stage. He had some strange feeling that this sun was bigger than all those on which he had ever stood. He thought that here it must be magnificent, and the scenery in which the best artists worked. Raising his head, he looked at the Ver. He wanted to understand what was going on here with the light, because the sun was really very big. The very next moment, the floodlights were turned on and the young man covered his face to look ahead. He stood like that for a while and looked forward. It seemed as if he was frozen. And because of the bright lighting, the audience seats from the stage were blurred. He had the feeling that everyone was looking only at him, although he understood perfectly well that there was not a single person in this auditorium, and he was alone on stage. He tried to act out the Hamlet scene, to be or not to be, that is the question. The very next moment, he saw an even brighter light that was directed at him from above, as if he were the center of the universe. At that moment, he realized that he was definitely dreaming and wanted his dream to come true. He wanted to go on that stage as the main character. His dream of becoming a leading actor in a prestigious theater was like an incomprehensible peak. But after saying a short line standing right on this stage, he felt an even greater force of attraction to this place. But then he realized that he was not yet good enough for this stage. He thought at that moment that everything would work out for him, and he would definitely play the main character here. He turned around and walked towards the exit, but he felt much better and much stronger. He thought that he would not miss the opportunity for anything. After some time, he was sitting in a cafe and drinking coffee with the same guy who told him that he had such a face when he stood on stage that it was unbearable to take your eyes off him. The young man said that he would still become that very actor who would charge everyone around here. The guy replied that he had no doubts about him at all. Then he looked at his watch and said that it was time for him to go to the meeting. His schedule only allowed him to take short breaks between performances. Then he asked if he wanted to see the backstage of the festival. The young man couldn't even imagine it. At that moment, a man came in and asked if they weren't talking about the festival and about temptation. It was a friend of the guy. He had been standing here for a long time, and he was not in a good mood at all, and because of the confusion, he was talking about how the team was supposed to be brought yesterday evening, but the delivery was delayed until the morning. And then he also said that he somehow cobbled this thing together for his son half an hour before the play started. He thought he would die right there, and then he added that he would leave early today. So if anyone wanted a tour, they would just have to mention his name. The guy said that the Hyundai team was also allowed to conduct a tour and pointed towards this team. The guy said that his time was up. He had already gone and Yuman could enjoy himself. The young man said thank you very much for the day he spent with him today. After some time, he was sitting in a chair watching what was happening on stage. At that moment, the spirit of acting sat on his hands, who also wanted to watch everything that was happening. The assembly was going on the stage. He was interested to see how the assembly stage would go. They managed to create it with well-integrated elements. The spirit of acting looked and said that the main character's acting was lousy. The young man said that maybe he would surprise him again. But in the very next moment, something happened that no one expected. The young man didn't even have time to get scared. He didn't know whether it was the desert or whether it was unexpected for everyone around him that the props began to fall. The young man and the spirit of acting froze in surprise. When one of the huge beams fell, it became clear that something had gone wrong on stage. People started shouting for the lights to be turned on to see what had happened, and everyone started running to one place. Someone shouted for an ambulance to be called quickly. After some time, an ambulance arrived with a team of doctors. They took away one of the guys who were on that stage. One of the guys was talking on the phone about how an ambulance had arrived, and in his opinion, everything was fine because the guy who was lying there wasn't that seriously hurt. The person he was talking to wanted to know all the details. Then he was told that this guy seemed to have a broken bone. He didn't understand if it was serious. Everyone who remained on stage began to figure out among themselves what was happening with their play, because something was wrong. It was all because they delivered it to my son late. They said that they installed it in a hurry so there could be some problems. The guys who were on stage didn't understand what to do now because this guy had more than half the lines and none of them knew who could replace him. One of the actors said that, given that Boshi half of the lines belong to the main character, it is better to immediately contact the association and the commission. They did not understand what to do and how to learn the movement of the lighting signals. The young man sat in a chair and watched everything that was happening. He listened to the fact that they did not argue and that many of them did not want to give up. The spirit of acting thought it was quite amusing to watch what was happening at that moment. He said that he was going to take advantage of their agreement. The young man saw a sign on which it was written, "Compensation under the contract with the spirit reconciliation will happen." Now refusal was impossible. Yuman didn't have time to say anything. He only tried to stop Miho, but it was too late. Even though it was a completely unlit room, the only place where there was light was where the young man and the spirit of acting were sitting. The next moment he rose from his seat and headed towards the hay. It seemed that he was absolutely calm, and he didn't have a single emotion. He was doing something that he would never have done before. Going down a little lower, the young man said that he could play this role. Everyone else turned and looked at him. He stood in front of him with an open face, and with his magnificent smile, he was ready to play this scene instead of this guy. All the other actors were asking who this was. One of the girls even asked if he was really on tour with us. The director of this performance asked if he was an actor by any chance. The young man replied that yes, it was some kind of coincidence. They only had an hour and a half left, and that was enough. He said that he would show a much better game than their main character and then added that he didn't need to be paid. The young man took his hands and told them not to worry. Reply how he will quickly learn them. The girl did not even have time to answer him. Yuman looked at one page after another of this script. He needed to learn his role as quickly as possible. Then, when he had completely skimmed through the entire script, he stood there for a while, silently thinking about the work. Then the young man slammed the notebook shut and said that he remembered everything and was ready. One of the actors couldn't come to his senses. He asked who this crazy bastard was who was trying to force himself on them. At this point, the young man began to speak his part about the fact that there are two paths to the squid, a short path through the city and a path that goes around through the mountains. Naturally, he chose the second path. Then he began to speak according to the text that where there are no hanging human beings, where there is sunlight and ritza on the water and mountain birds that are looking for a mate sing at this moment. He joked about real delight. The director of this play thought that this is the second act, chapter 3 line of the main character. He did not make a single mistake. He did not understand how he managed it. The director immediately asked what the last phrase was in act number 3, chapter 6. The young man answered that the ingredients for making the doll were ready. All that was left was to add Goddess bone powder so that the doll's skin would shine. He kept saying that this was all for his most beautiful doll in the world, and he had to die. All the other actors did not understand how this could be. The young man asked if they had sheets of lines and a diagram of the production, because they have little time, so they need to do a technical rehearsal. At that moment, the young man clicked on the spirit of acting that was in his body because they had removed the line and block diagram. The spirit of acting told him to give me feedback during his performance that it distracts him. The spirit of acting told him to shut up for a minute and he would come back as soon as this performance was over. And the spirit of acting also said that for him, this will also be an example. He should remember this performance. The young man felt that he couldn't even move his fingers, as if his body didn't obey him. He wondered if he really couldn't do anything until the end of the performance. It seemed to him that sweat was running down his face. At that moment, the young man thought about Miho. Most likely he doesn't have the spirit of acting. He thought about whether he can trust him. After a few minutes, they decided that the rehearsal would begin, and the actors and crew had to take their places. Yuman gave his body to the spirit of acting that was near him in the theater. There is a so-called cue, a coordinated signal to turn on and off the light and sound, and in other words, these signals serve as a guide. In this scene, the sound of pulling the skin turns on, and at this moment, the light changes. Already in the next scene, the nanny receives money from the gambler. The action occurs when she puts her hands in her apron, the signal to complete this price of turning off the light. There are also changes in the sound, lighting, and scenery on stage that are quickly coordinated with the action. If you miss even the slightest detail when performing a play, there is a risk that actors who have rehearsed for a long time may forget their lines. At that moment, the director said that Marion should get ready. This was the very character he was supposed to play. The spirit of acting in the body of the young man thought that he needed to track the signal and focus. When he approached the edge of the stage, he saw lines on the floor that were glowing. They indicated what his hero had done the previous time. So he decided that if he could keep an eye on the residual energy after the afternoon performance, that would be enough, and he followed the trail of that energy. The director and the others who were watching this performance were very surprised. One of them asked the director if he was definitely not sleeping. How is this possible? The director did not understand how to memorize the script, react instantly to lines. This is simply amazing. But what was most surprising for him? So this is how he plays with full concentration. And at some point they realize that they can no longer take their eyes off him. The director thought he still had so many questions, but now was not the time, so he shouted that the rehearsal was over and they had to act according to the script. He also asked the actors to try not to screw up and said that the fight is on. When it was time for the performance, apart from the committee that sat right in front of the stage, there were very few people in the hall. The girl who was sitting on this commission turned her head back and looked around. She noticed that there were no people at all today, which meant that there were no people willing to watch this performance. Another representative of this commission said that this is not a famous troupe, so there may be few people. He hopes that there will be at least not below average. The girl said that she will try to go with her. The lights in the hall went out. The girl said that it seemed like the show was starting. She turned to watch it. The curtain on the stage began to rise slowly. There was almost no light. The performance began to play the same way as the previous time. Everything was ordinary, and the actors did not show anything new. The jury that sat and evaluated this performance was also not delighted. One could say that they simply did not watch it. The most crucial moment had arrived. It was Act 1, Scene 2, when the main character was supposed to enter and he was already ready. The young man in whose body was the spirit of acting told him that he had opened his feelings to him and that he should watch carefully. He did not understand at first, but he had no choice but to take the first step onto the stage, and he certainly did. The main character turned out to be quite believable. His hands, his bruises under his eyes, everything was natural. And the most important thing was his expression. He looked as if he was experiencing the same thing that his hero was experiencing. Surprisingly, the chairman of the jury, who had been sitting and not watching this performance until that moment, raised his head up and looked at this hero. All the feelings and sensations that the main character experienced flowed into him. Human beings are a species that is completely incomprehensible, unable to truly understand what true beauty is, praising everything that dazzles, considering jewelry to be the pinnacle of art. He stood on his son and said that he was not like them, and that it was all as if he was this very hero. The main character was sitting at his desk making his next doll and realized that it was not enough. He couldn't do it. He had already thrown out several blanks in order to burn them in his oven. It was all so truly similar that no one could take their eyes off it. And at some point, the main character turned his head and looked to the side. It seemed that some spark appeared in his eyes, and he had some idea. He then said that if the most beautiful person becomes a puppet for a doll. Everyone who was in the hall was shocked. They looked at their son and could not take their eyes off this actor. Also, the chairman of the jury, who paid attention to him, understood that he didn't know who it was, but his acting was great thought that it impressed him so much that it became even more uncomfortable. At some point, he caught himself thinking that this unpleasant sensation was as if there was some kind of crustacean in a human shell in front of him. He thought, why was he looking at this scene and not understanding how he was starting to think the same way as this hero? And most importantly, he gradually begins to experience the emotions of this monster. He caught himself thinking that he was attracted by his desire. The main character was so convincing that it seemed not a game at all, but real life. Everyone who sat in the hall understood how beautiful the doll that was created with the help of a devoted monster must be, and everyone wanted to see the most beautiful doll with their own eyes. His game was reminiscent of some kind of madness, because he was talking about how if only he killed a few more people, Only then would a beautiful woman appear before his eyes, and he would continue to kill people. It was becoming unbearable to watch. It resembled some kind of obsession. It was the same obsession as with Freddie, only Marion was a completely fictional character after all. It was clearly an act, and somewhere one could praise the weak echoes of sympathy felt in Marion's sensitive heart. And most importantly, with a body that can move and its own role, this insurmountable ecstasy from the fact that it finally appeared before the public as a present. And because of this joy, he has unleashed a phenomenally beautiful performance, almost cruel in nature, and it captivates the audience. The lights were off, the show was over, there was complete silence in the hall. The spectators who were sitting there were a little confused. They wanted to understand if this was really the end, and there would be no continuation. A girl from the jury asked who this actor was. She had never seen him before. The man replied that they needed to ask the director. He stood up and called the director to him. For some reason, he was very upset and called the director again. When the director came up, he said that they also didn't know who this actor was. They had an accident during the day, so they were in a hurry, but this actor immediately disappeared as soon as the performance ended. The only thing they didn't know was that a technician from the Hagen Hall brought him. Sveta the technician said that he had never seen him on stage before. He just gave a tour to what he thought was a very curious guy. The man who was on the jury said that they should give the recording then, because they have a recording of this performance, to which they replied that they say that it is necessary to film only once a day, with the exception of influential teams. Someone said that they have a recording of the day's performance. He can only provide it. The president of this festival gathered all the jury members and said that they had to pretend that this never happened. The man who was sitting there told the president not to talk like that. Then the president said that no one knew who this guy was and they were powerless. There were few spectators, and it was a completely foreign actor. This jury representative said that he can't if they recognize this performance as a failure, then he will also resign. The girl from the jury judge said that she also supports this opinion. The chairman asked what they proposed to do then. The jury judge said that they can only wait for the day when this unknown actor will appear again in the Korean scam theater world. And for themselves, they called him the heavenly actor. They gave him this name. This jury judge said that they should give the prize for best acting at the 19th Theater Festival, and it is this actor whom they named as a heavenly actor. The lighting technician went out into the street and dialed the number of the young man. He greeted him. Then he asked the young man if he was okay and how he got home. The guy answered him that he was already home. Yuman said, "Thank you very much" to him again. He also noticed that he interfered a little, but he didn't want them to make a fuss. The lighting technician said that they had already made a fuss anyway. He wanted to know what happened on stage. And then he added that this was, of course, top secret. But before the end of the theater festival, a prize for best acting had been approved for him, and he said that he would tell the details later. He thanked him for his work. When the young man heard these words, he was simply delighted. He did not even expect such recognition from others, much less receive a prize for best acting. But the next moment he turned his head and looked at the spirit of acting because it was he who was in his body. He asked the spirit of acting what the hell he had done, because later he would have to show a level no less than this time. The spirit of acting didn't understand what he was talking about. The young man said it didn't matter how serious the deal was. How could someone suddenly take over his entire body without explanation? The spirit of acting said he didn't have time to explain. The young man was indignant and said that then at least he should behave like him. If they knew his name, it would be bad for him. He didn't know how he could explain memorizing a script in 10 minutes. The young man thought for a moment and said that he could explain it, and said that he had already read this script before. The spirit of acting laughed and said that it was a very original idea. Then the spirit of acting several Raman with his tail near him, and already sitting very close, he lowered his eyes down and began to say that he would forgive him. He asked the young man for forgiveness, saying that he was always watching the acting and wanted to try it himself. Everything that the spirit of acting said turned out to be not entirely convincing to the young man. He asked him to stop and not make excuses anymore. He was thinking about how to get out of this situation. The young man asked if he really wanted to play this particular character. The spirit of acting said that it was exactly yes. He was always drawn to the same as the spirit of acting. He decided to become a ghost and watch everything from the stage. The young man asked him if he was playing for the first time or had already tried. Then the spirit answered that he had done it several times as part of the last time about 100 years ago. The young man asked him again, so he doesn't want to improve his acting at someone else's expense. The spirit of acting replied to him that he had already said that the contracts in the heavenly kingdom were very strict, and he could not violate them under any circumstances. And he also added that if the young man does not agree to the deal, then he will never be able to move into him. The young man thought that, frankly speaking, he does not trust everything that the spirit told him. On the other hand, what he showed today was something, it was completely perfect. The young man understood perfectly well that for the actors this game was like a miracle, and it was the complete embodiment of artistry. The young man at that moment thought that the game of the spirit of acting would become a good foundation for him, and he also realized that the concept of trust but check with him is better to adhere to. After some time, summer practice began in Odious. The young man was offered this internship. He was also told that they would like to organize seeds with one very outstanding student and asked him if he was interested. The young man thought about it because he was offered this summer internship. It was already a success for him. It was a program that took place annually, where they taught acting skills, inviting outstanding actors of different genres. The young man thought that he had just recently asked Ryushin about this practice. Then he did a favor on his own behalf. The young man told the professor that he had already said that he would hardly be able to take part. As an outsider, it would be a bit burdensome for him to be there. The professor said that Ryushin was not the only one. And he was talking about someone else. Actor Yoon Han-sung asked about it. The young man was very surprised, really. Yoon Han-sung actor. The professor said that since they knew each other personally, he showed him a video of the classes and said that he could give a lot of advice. Yoon Hansen was an actor who, after a long period of obscurity, began to shine in the mid-30s. His nickname Bizet is due to the fact that there was no audience that was not affected by his acting skills. He was one of those actors who plays tragic roles, and the most important thing was that despite his small stature, he performed simply unimaginable. The young man remembered how in his past life he had already met this actor. And when they met, he told the young man not to be discouraged because one day the light would shine on him too. He, being the main character of one of the projects of the past life, supported him. This gave him motivation to strive for more. The advice of such a person was very valuable. So the young man stuck to it and lowered his head in agreement that he would undergo a summer internship. In fact, he himself approached him with this request. He wanted to hear an opinion about his game now. In just a few days, summer internship would begin, and he had to go to university. There were no students at the university. He stood alone in the long corridor in front of the door. All he had to do was take one step forward, open that door, and go inside. He thought only about one thing, that this odious Italius day practice will help him. He was sure that they are all very good people. He took the door handle in his hand and slowly began to lower it down. Then he opened the door slightly. When he went inside, he saw students sitting on the floor who were looking at him in surprise. Among them were two of his acquaintances. They were with him in the group when they staged a short play. These guys were very happy and came up to him and asked the young man if he was really here. All the other guys said that they will not give up until the end of the seminar. I don't understand who this guy is. The girl said that this guy came on the recommendation of Yoon Han-san and that everyone else should be softer with him. Among them, there was one girl whom he had not seen before. She was very beautiful. She stood up and said that he was an outsider who took Ryushin's place. This girl was Song Yuri, who played the role of Zizi in the drama Paradise Diary. The young man didn't understand what he was talking about, and most importantly, he didn't understand why he took someone's place, so he decided to ask what she was talking about. The girl immediately explained that he really didn't know because Ryushin stayed aside so that he could be included in this practice. Yuman tried to justify himself. He said that he had not heard about it and that it was true. The girl ran up to Yuri and said how could she say such a thing, but she stood there and was sure that it was because of him. The girl tried to prove that it was not so. It was a seminar for which only 20 people were selected. She explained that they were preparing the composition of the groups. For 20, 40, and 50 people were recruited into the first group by one more person. A conflict of opinions arose due to the violation of the plan. In the end, Ryushin said that Yuman should be included instead of him, but he said that everything was fine since he had taken this practical seminar last year. This is Sun Yuri. She's the vice chairwoman of Odious this year. She's a bit straightforward, but she definitely does not mean any harm. Song Yuri was not happy with this performance and told Bang Hee-sun to stop talking nonsense. Bang Hee-sun insisted that Shin Yu-meng was not to blame and that they did not lose anything because of this. She did not understand why she was angry. Song Yuri was, on the contrary, even more excited. She said that this was a big loss now they would not be able to attend the seminar with Ryushin. The girl turned her head, looked at the young man, and said that she didn't care at all how strongly he was recommended. And what she can't admit is that this man is a stronger actor than Ryushin. At that moment, the young man remembered the conversation he had the day before with Ryushin. He said that he hoped that the young man would be able to take advantage of this opportunity and feel the charm of Odious. Now it was clear what he meant. The young man understood that So Ryushin refused to participate not at all in order to show his sacrifice. He did it because he wanted to give him such an opportunity so that he would feel the charm of Odious and join them. It was a kind of investment. An investment associated with risk. And so Ryushin willing to accept it to understand how attractive Odious is, you need to experience it yourself. The young man thought that he could not refuse the opportunity because they were trying to lure him away. And he was also happy with everything because this seminar could only benefit him. The girl was simply outraged. Yuman told her to let him show himself. He wanted to show them all what he was capable of. Sun Yuri calmed down a little and said that she agreed. She was ready to allow him. The young man explained to her that this practice would help him a lot. He looked at her with an open gaze. It seemed he was ready to be friends with her. Sun Yuri thought that during the last 7 semesters, everyone in the film and theater department talked only about him, and she also became interested in who it was. For a moment she thought that it was probably some person who believed in his talent, and in this way he was simply bragging about it. The girl understood perfectly well, and this was her main rule, that efforts accumulate time, and time creates a reputation. When she was still a child actor, she learned the most important truth for herself when she watched So Ryushin work. Despite the fact that this guy was talented, he was the first to come to rehearsal, and the last to leave the set, he was a more serious actor than anyone else. Even then, at a very young age, she thought that if she was sincerely going to take the path of acting, she should learn from people like So Ryushin. She was very upset to hear comments about how he easily finds stunt doubles because of his beauty, and the fact that he started out as a child actor, which is why she tried even harder. The girl knew for sure and was sure that there are no geniuses who appear out of nowhere, so she continued to train and rehearse diligently. The only thought that did not leave her was that someone from a completely different specialty always tries acting for the first time and everyone makes noise about him. She was interested in the question of what kind of person he is. The girl turned around and walked away in the other direction. She was sure that she could not recognize him as an actor. A few minutes later, Lee Song appeared in this audience. She worked in the Tube. Comet actress said if everyone is ready, then she is ready to start this seminar. The actress said that 3 years have passed since she stood in this place. All this time she regretted that she could not meet her younger colleagues because of the performance. The boys were very happy to see her. They expressed their delight because they hoped that she would be able to teach them something. The actress looked and saw that there was one guy sitting away from the other students. So she couldn't help but think that this wasn't the one that Han Man and Jae Pil recommended. The actress thought that she was very interested in how this guy would show himself at this seminar. She began to say that the preliminary announcement of today's seminar is a hearing. Well, she started explaining that from that moment on, everyone should memorize this phrase until it becomes natural for them. The dialogue was written on the board. The actress said that she would perform everything that was written under A, and all the other guys should respond with lines under B. The actress immediately said that she wanted to invite a student from the front row. She was interested in trying. The girl agreed. The actress asked her if she had eaten. The girl replied that no, not yet. Then the actress asked what they would eat. The girl answered her, as it was written on the board, stewed meat with kimchi. Then the actress said that it was quite good, but it was very ordinary, and asked the student who was sitting next to the girl to rehearse this dialogue. The actress lowered her eyes and asked him in a different tone if he hadn't eaten yet. The guy replied that no, not yet. The actress immediately interrupted him and said that she wanted the girl sitting behind him to say this dialogue with her. The actress asked the same question she ate. The girl said no more. The actress thought that it was very good, then they will stick to the original that she wrote. But unexpectedly for her, the girl screamed that maybe then they wouldn't order pizza with kimchi. Their dialogue looked completely different, and it was different from what was written on the board. The actress began to explain that the instant line is the promised language, which is why when actors get to know their lines, they can respond mechanically without listening to the other character's dialogue. She also added that in severe cases, some actors can even remember what the next line will be before the other one has finished it. This is what is called a gray zone. This is a situation when both the actions of an actor and the actions of another actor are strictly written in the script, which makes them predictable. The actress added that in this case, acting in such a state would not be natural. And most importantly, she said that good actors always know how to listen to their partner, even with pre-prepared lines. When an actor listens fully to the words of another person and delivers lines that come from the heart, this creates dramatic tension. Although many people think that acting is only about portraying a role well, the more fundamental essence is the ability to listen. The reason why this actress was able to gain a foothold in the main cast of The Corpses of the Comet is precisely due to the ability to pay attention to the dialogue. The actress said that today they will practice a lot in the ability to listen. The actress said that the seminar they are about to start is called a workshop of counter-arguments. The actress added that if they ask another person whether he likes apples, the answer might be like this: I don't like apples, I prefer watermelon, and so on. Even if it is not a complete denial, they get a replica meaning which will not differ slightly from the given actress asked the students in a black t-shirt to come forward. They sat opposite each other and looked at each other straight in the eyes. The actress smiled, and the first thing she asked him about was that they were friends, to which the guy replied no. She was his head man. Then the actress immediately asked him where he was from, young man, and replied. The actress said that this is all wrong. In this case, he should have asked why she should care about his hometown, or that she doesn't have a hometown or something like that. She explained that you just need to accept the other person's words and said that you should move on to another student. She looked at you, Soryuri. The actress greeted her and paused. She wanted the result she was talking about to be completely different. Since the girl was already an experienced actress, she immediately understood what was being discussed, and she replied that she was not in a very good mood today. The actress asked her name. The girl said that she doesn't talk about it. All the other students sat with their mouths open while listening to this dialogue. The actress asked the girl if she often hears compliments about her appearance. The girl answered her that the shell doesn't matter at all. The most important thing is the content. The actress said that she did well and that it was a good job and she could sit down in her place. The girl very modestly stood up from her chair, lowered her head, and thanked him for the praise. The actress turned her head and looked at the other students, and she thought for a moment who would be next. Then she asked the student sitting on the left if he could come out and help her. He agreed. It was Yuman. The other students looked at him. They also wanted to see what this guy who took Soryushin's place was capable of. Yuman went out and sat down on a chair opposite the actress. They sat there for a while looking at each other. The first question the actress asked him was who the young man lowered his eyes and answered her and who he was in her opinion. Then he raised his eyes and looked at her and asked if he really needed to talk about this. The actress immediately realized that the guy was playing and not completing the task that she had just given him. Then she told him as soon as she could find out what he didn't want to answer and immediately asked him where he was from. Yuman unexpectedly, for everyone pulled his legs off Paul and put them on a chair. His voice became completely different. He began to stutter and began to talk about things that he didn't remember exactly. He said that he doesn't remember, but he thinks it was a very dark place. All his behavior indicated that he was afraid. The actress looked at him and understood that he had already come up with a character for himself, and he would not stick to the format of the task for a counter-argument. The actress asked him if he was really uncomfortable here and if he was afraid of the dark. The young man continued to play and talk about how he was not afraid at all. He grew up in the middle of pitch darkness. The actress decided that she had to play along with him, so she told him that he looked very vulnerable. He sat like a shackled child on a chair, clasping his knees. He looked like he had no strength at all. The young man said that strength is not only cruelty, and not only what is visible from the outside. Unexpectedly for everyone, he smiled, narrowed his eyes, and it seemed that everything around him began to glow. He said that he could fly. The actress asked him again if he was really going to fly. She was also very surprised. It was also a big surprise for her that this guy was so good at acting that he could parry. At some point, he even cried out that he had just remembered. He absolutely remembered everything thanks to her words. After this phrase, tears even appeared in his eyes, but he was not crying. These were tears of joy. He looked at her and it seemed that he was sincere. At some point, he unexpectedly said to everyone that he was a butterfly, and that was why he was in these all the time. But when he became a butterfly, he saw the sun and saw how beautiful everything was around him. All the other students in Sun Yuri were mesmerized by the way he played and couldn't take their eyes off him. The actress smiled at the young man and said that what happened now was very impressive. He is a very interesting actor. But these words upset Song Yuri very much because it turned out that she was mistaken in her opinion. After some time, the seminar conducted by actress Lee Sun ended. The young man came out of this seminar thinking that a 2-week acting seminar lasting 6 o'clock a day and 1 to 3 days with each teacher was interesting to him. Also during this seminar, there were classes on individual assignments on the topic of creating an image, as well as a seminar on improving the body to optimize physical balance. It was also necessary to create a composition of 2 people to draw natural emotions through empathy. There was also a joint work in which 4 people participated to create the image and creativity to the maximum. All this time, and not together, they carried out various tasks. The young man did not have time to look back as the members of Odious began to perceive him as they should. And the most important thing is that his impression of them also changed, even though he sometimes made comments to him about the tempo like you did this time. The young man said that he was wrong, and he will correct himself. I answered him that it was nothing to worry about, he would just pass it again. That was the difference from Chang Chan. They freely exchanged opinions without the old-fashioned attitude between juniors and seniors. At one of the seminars, he had problems with body balance when performing a turn, and he asked to have a look at it if they had time, and no one refused him. Many actors were ready to ask for help without hesitation, offered help to others, and above all were truly hardworking. Even despite the busy schedule, the eldest of Odious was very attached to the guys. Now he understood why Soryushin spoke of hope, and that he would feel the charm of Odious. That day he came earlier than usual to the seminar, and when he opened the door he was very surprised. He saw Mon Yuri, who was cleaning the auditorium before the seminar. The young man asked her why she was so early today. The girl turned away from him and was still cold towards him. The young man thought that Song Yuri's image had also changed greatly. She began to feel embarrassed when she saw the young man. Sun Yuri, who leads the work, always comes first, and leaves last works hard besides. She rarely asks for help from others. At any opportunity she tries to cope with her duties with her own hands. The young man walked up to the mirror and looked into it. He thought how hard she polished it so that the cabinet would shine so much, and he could see his reflection perfectly. It was that girl, despite the fact that she had no tricks or strategies and she was not eloquent, but for some reason she still attracted me. Yuman weakened himself at the thought that, having come her constant efforts, it was difficult not to appreciate her. The girl, after cleaning, stood in front of the mirror and began breathing exercises. She began to warm up before the seminar. Then she made different sounds so that it was correct, so she breathed not with her chest but with her stomach. The young man looked at her and realized that she was most likely doing a vocal warm-up. He took a few steps towards her and said that using choral vocals is not always convenient. The girl turned her head and looked at him. Yuman told her to try singing in falsetto once. He thinks that in this case her lines will be transmitted well, and her voice will sound much clearer. Since we are talking about the beginning of the 2000s, there was a stereotype that choral singing is always necessary for vocals in the hay. The girl turned to look at him and said, "Does he really enjoy finding simple answers to complex questions?" She was just angry. Her face turned red and she didn't understand why he was interfering with her singing. Well, she decided to listen to him, the young man asked her, and why she was suddenly so worried. The avocado girl said that she thinks that her voice doesn't reach the audience when she plays. It was because of this that she was pushed aside from the main role in the autumn play. So recently she has been constantly engaged in choral singing, but this does not help her, the young man asked her, because she had no problems with acting in dramas. On top of that, the sound was always recorded separately. Why was she so worried? Because in fact, plays are not a serious genre. The girl lowered her head. The young man asked him if she was really going to play there forever, even after graduation. This was wrong. Another way had to be found. Then she was told if she was in their company, then she should look at the script that they sent her. The girl always believed that there is a difference between not being able to do something and choosing not to do it. She also believed that being an actor who only works in movies and dramas and because of the difficulty with stage vocals is like being a nobody. She never wanted to set boundaries and avoid trying new things, so she always practiced until she got it right. She believed that the basis of stage vocals is choral singing. She also understood that after long training she managed to realize choral singing, but she still had problems. But she still didn't like it all, and it seemed to her that it was very strange because of the way her voice sounded. She thought her voice became strained when she spoke, using her chest voice, but at some point she realized that her normal voice sounded better. When despite her efforts, nothing worked out for her, she even faced a choice whether she was really a lousy actor. For her, this question was very important and concerned her acting ego, and this guy was just able to come up to her and touch her. So she turned around and immediately told him that whether it was a task or an acting game, he always had answers to any questions, and would it really solve anything with her voice if she sang the folds there? The girl looked at him and said, "Do geniuses really have such an easy life?" Of course, no one in this life really knows what's going on in another person's head. He didn't argue with her, and said that in reality there was no monologue or dialogue. It was about their relationship. The girl had nothing to answer and remained standing where she was. She thought for a bit and answered him that they weren't even close, and yet he thought he knew absolutely everything and watched several training sessions at seminars. The girl turned around and started singing again. She needed to work on herself. but his words about how, in reality, there is no monologue or dialogue somehow touched her. She remembered how, as a child, she would fall asleep when she read the script, and how her mother would wake her up to tell her she had to go to an audition. And she reminded me how happy she was when they said that the role of Jesus in the drama Paradise Diary was officially approved for son Yuri. Everyone else who didn't get past this rejection thought she was chosen just because she was pretty cute, and no one thought she worked really hard to get the role. When people looked at her, they said that it must be so convenient for her to live and get everything from life just because she was pretty. But no one understood that she tried her best. When she grew up and went to school, many people also envied her. I think that she is pretty, and only because of this she acts in dramas. Many people didn't understand whether this was true because their school had high standards, and they couldn't understand how she was able to get in. Some of them thought that they made an exception for her. Obviously, it was a special set for actors. Many people talked among themselves about how unfair it was. Other people studied 16 o'clock a day until they entered this school. But she got everything easily, and they didn't think the world was unfair. In fact, she passed the college entrance exams with the same result. She wanted to shout to everyone that they even know. At that moment, her voice was so strong that she didn't even sing but screamed. After such training, she felt better, but she knew if she didn't work, then she wouldn't succeed. In reality, everyone evaluates such people in their own way. She believed that everything in the world is arranged in our way. We are delusional. When she was very upset, she thought about how she didn't know how to justify it and why she started to behave like everyone else. Vidya, she also went through a difficult path, and since Yuman is a beginning actor, she quickly came to the conclusion that her absolute time of practice is not comparable with hers. She did not even want to know the real circumstances of his career. But despite this, she thought that she really could try drinking with a facet at least once. She thought about his words. Maybe in this case, the lines would be transmitted well, and the voice would sound clear. She decided to try it anyway and prepared herself to sing facet now. Then she hit a few notes in falsetto and held them for a few seconds. Immediately after that, she uttered the phrase Romeo for some reason, Romeo. She thought that her voice at that moment sounded clear and even as usual. But there was still something different in her voice that she now noticed. She thought that her voice had become more comfortable for her than it had been before, and she began to like it. A few minutes later, everyone gathered in the auditorium, and the guys were happy that it was finally time for the last program of the day, which was a master class from Ban Han-sun. In their opinion, this was the most expected because many watched his latest dramas, and they really liked it. One of the girls couldn't wait for him, and she was wondering what story he would share with them. The door of this auditorium opened, and the actor entered it. The guys were delighted. When the actor entered, he said hello to everyone and said that his name was Yoon Hoon Sung. The actor said he was going to give a seminar on emotional engagement today. He sat in front of them on a chair, one leg crossed over the other, saying that he didn't know whether he fit the definition or not, but he really liked it. Since he was recently called the same as the heroes he played, he smiled and said that everyone had the impression that he could only play tragedies. Well, nevertheless, he added that to some extent he is known for his sad acting. And all this is because the reason is his sincerity of emotion. The actor said that their audience is more discerning than they even think. So even though they all know it's acting, they still believe in that emotion. And most importantly, if you are not sure that the emotion is real, then they are not immediately paid attention to. The task set for them in this seminar was where the sincerity of these feelings will come from. One of the guys said that he thinks that the actor's experience plays a big role. The actor replied that the actor really experiences a lot of ups and downs in his life. He is definitely more expressive of his emotions. The actor began to say that they all already know that in his youth he was poor. The waiting period would also have been very long, but he also had a tragedy. He lost his first daughter. After which the actor asked the guys, but if they have an incurable disease, they will not be able to become good actors if they lose the people who surround them. The actor said that when they are sad, they should think whether they really feel this sadness deep in their souls. And then he added that most likely, most of them are overcome with emotions, and it is clear that they are not fully aware of their emotions. That's why many people play, showing very strong emotions, and say only that today was a very difficult day. The actor said they would practice expanding their range of emotions by thinking deeply about them, which is called emotional maximization. After the actor's speech, there was complete silence in the audience. It was an interesting topic for discussion. The actor said that before they begin their seminar, he would like to make 2 requests of them. He took the lamp and brought it near the chair and said that if negative emotions are experienced very deeply, they can only be released through violence or self-harm. It didn't matter at all what they felt inside. They had to remember that they were precious and refrain from violent actions. And he also added that from now on, all the stories that would take place in this auditorium would be buried in their hearts as soon as they walked out the door. The actor said that anyone who replaces someone else's grief with their own worries has no right to be an actor. The guys agreed with him. The actor said that first he would accept volunteers. The guy raised his hand. The actor said that the students who raised their hand should come forward and sit on the mat. The first volunteer came out and they asked him his name. The guy answered his name was Shin-Soo Ho. The actor then asked him what the strongest musea was in his life. He didn't care whether it was a good emotion or a bad one. The guy answered that he had the strongest emotion. Joy is an emotion that he usually doesn't like to choose. Then the actor asked when he felt this joy. Oddly enough, at that moment, the guy's face changed. He let his head down and thought. Then he started saying this emotion he felt when his parents got divorced. He had to go with one of the parents, and he chose his mother. Everyone else was looking at him because it was a real story, and he was really worried. This guy was talking about how their dad was initially indifferent to them, and he only realized this when he grew up and had another woman. When he was still little and watched when their dad came home, the atmosphere was always bad at that moment. He always hoped and thought that their father would not come again. Well, when their father had already divorced their mother, he said that he wanted to take one child with him, and he still can't understand whether it was a desire to pass on the inheritance or he simply didn't want his share to be taken away. The worst thing is that their father gave their mother a choice, as if he was generous, like when selling a puppy you had to choose the most beautiful one. He always understood that his father always liked his younger brother more than him, and that's why his father pointed the finger at him, despite the fact that they were brothers and they were not going to separate. Well, the next moment, they weren't holding each other's hands because their lives had already changed dramatically. At that moment, he was in deep shit. He didn't want his mother to choose him. He was hoping for that. The actor at that moment asked if he remembered what he felt when his mother called him a guardian. The young man said that yes, he felt like shit, but he was happy. He looked at the expression on his younger brother's face with some pride. At that moment, he was young, but he was selfish. He still feels sick from the memories of that time. The actor asked him what his brother looked like. Then the young man remembered what his younger brother was like. The last time he saw him, he had tears in his eyes. His story stopped there. Tears started flowing from his eyes. He once again experienced the same feeling he had then, the feeling of separation. The guy lowered his head down so that no one would see his tears. The actor said that instead of pushing these feelings, they will remember them gradually. The first thing he needed to remember was his father and the facial expression of his mother, and also his younger brother. He needed to say what he felt when he looked at it. The actor asked the guy to spit it out in his own words. They were emotions. It was not joy at all. At this point, the young man makes fun of himself for feeling happy. Tears are pouring from his eyes, although he tries to smile, but it is not joy at all. The young man asks his younger brother for forgiveness for choosing him. This feeling that he felt was hatred. He looked at the guys who were sitting right there on the floor. They were worried along with this guy because it was honest. The actor said that after the first one, they all need to rest to move on. After everyone had had enough rest, the actor said that this time he also wanted to take part. And since no one will be in charge now, this may look more like a monologue than a maximum display of emotions. He wanted to show how to express certain emotions. To do this, the actor took off his shoes and stood barefoot on the rug. Then for some time, he stood motionless with the fists of his hands. Then he closed his eyes and continued to stand like that. It seemed that they were about to find out about his emotions. The actor closed his eyes so much that his face was one continuous wrinkle. He immediately uttered the word daughter. Then he started talking about his dear daughter. Her name was Bo Yoon. She was his one and only daughter. He talked about how he still remembers the moment she was born, her first cry, which he tried to remember as the greatest joy in his life. Now, every time he thought about it, he also remembered clearly how she first said, "Daddy, come home." Then he was touched by such a clear pronunciation that he simply smiled. Scratching his head when he was about to leave the house, she began to cry as if she had lost the whole world. At that moment, in her eyes filled with tears, there was only one question: why is he leaving? Lately, every time he came to an empty house and realized that she was gone, he squeezed his heart, which was filled with resentment, and this very question, why? His daughter went through a lot of pain in her youth and became more mature than him. She whispered in his ear every time, "Don't cry, Daddy. She will be okay." When she first held his fingers, they were so fragile that he even cried. At that moment, he thought that no matter what storms come into the world, in his arms, his decisions are to be protected even if they are torn easier than a sheet of paper. At that moment, The actor began to cry and say that all he could do was pray because there was nothing else he could do. Yuman thought it was very surprising that these sharp emotions were the source of actor Yoon Han-sung's emotions, so he became as sensitive to other people's tragedies as he was to his own. He was most likely able to truly empathize with the sadness of an insignificant supporting actor when they were filming together. The young man thought that he was a good person and a good actor. Time passed very quickly and it was evening outside. The seminar was about to end. One student told his story and almost everyone there had sad stories that brought everyone else to tears. The young man thought that now it was his turn. He was the only one left and the last one. But at that moment, the actor said thank you to everyone who took part in today's difficult task, and he said that he wanted to ask them all for only one thing. And understanding Yuman was very upset. Did they really forget about him? The actor took a few steps forward, turned and looked at the young man. He called his name, so the young man raised his head and looked at the actor. The actor said that he probably heard that it was he who recommended his friend to take him to the seminars. In fact, today is the first time he sees him in person. The professor showed him a video of him performing in class. He said that in maximizing emotions, it is a practice used to acquire boundaries of emotion. And he also said that the professor probably did not understand why he was so hooked on him. The actor unexpectedly fell silent and paused as if he was thinking about something serious. Then he said that he just wants to see his acting in a monodrama. The young man was a little surprised by such a proposal. Was it really possible? Would they really let him play in a monodrama? The actors told him that he wanted to try his full-length monodrama Noah and it should last at least 90 minutes. He asked it would be great if he had a script for a monodrama or he could play the scene that he prepared for him. Then the actor said that if he wanted, he could try right now, which was surprising to some. The young man replied that if they give him some time to prepare, it is possible because he has a script for a monodrama. All the other guys were so shocked and surprised that they turned their heads and they couldn't even hold back their emotions. The actor was also surprised, but he didn't show his emotions that much. The young man said that he needed just a little time and he needed equipment for the performance. He asked permission, asking if he could use the equipment that he felt was absolutely necessary. Then the young man turned around and said that Soo-ho-hyun should light him from behind and showed how. And he also said that Hye-sung put her lips on the lamp and he should lie there at that time. Yuri's dream said the girl sitting next to her about what Yuman said about him needing it, and they should establish it. Does he really think that it is possible to play a full-length monodrama? She started to complain that it seemed to her that she would die from fatigue and when she played 10 minutes in a monodrama. But here for 90 minutes, it was simply unbearable. One of the guys said that it would be hard for the audience to sit through such a long time. He also added that it was very difficult to concentrate on a 90-minute performance. Everyone was already exhausted because of this seminar. The actor said that he was a little curious. Firstly, he wanted to know what kind of scenario it was and how he was going to divide these sons. Well, he thought to himself that despite the fact that they say that everyone is tired, their mood is quite good. The very next moment, the young man asked if everything was ready and if he could start. The actor sat behind all the other students on a chair so that they could see better. He said that they could begin. The young man said that he needed to turn off the light and apologized for the inconvenience. At this point, the actor asked the young man what his play was called. When the first light came on, the young man said that the play was called Survival. Then the actor said that it was time to start. Yuman stood in the middle of his son, and a light shone right in his face. The young man lowered his head and began to ask the honorable judge to mitigate the punishment for the real murderer as much as possible. He raised his head and shouted that the case 2000-0124 murder. There is no doubt that the culprit of this incident is the son of the victim, Kim Pyeon-do. He said that the evidence was obvious. Firstly, a fingerprint was left on a kitchen knife in evidence number 13. Secondly, he had no alibi at that time. Thirdly, their relationship had deteriorated right up until the incident. The guy stood and continued his one-man show. He said that in their opinion it was his fault, and if someone asked why it happened, he also wanted to know about it. He began to explain that it was most likely because he was born by mistake and was a bastard who ruined his father's life. Or maybe because he doesn't know how to make money, he has no self-control at all. He just wants punishment for everything that happened to him in his life. The young man asked at one time who said this and who should decide the fate of others. At that moment, the lights went out and there was complete silence. Yuman continued his performance, talking about his father. The actor watched his one-man show and understood that he keeps the audience on edge from the very beginning. Moreover, the way of using light and screen is really great. Light illuminates the space and fills it with shadows of those who watch the performance. The screen behind the actor creates the feeling that you are watching a square TV. And the audience suddenly becomes the one who sees the devil who killed his father. Well, if you look closely, you can see a young man who was abused by his father since childhood, and they can see a young man who grew up covered in scars. Yuman continued his story. He talked about how he was ready to show the crime scene and he was ready to tell everything about this place. His hands were in front of him as if they were in handcuffs. Then he started showing the knife he used to cut vegetables. It was the same knife that was in his father's back, and everyone clearly saw this knife. It seemed like drops of puta were running down his face. He was all in those experiences that he was now talking about. He was talking about the knives that were right in his father's back. Then the young man fell to his knees so that the light was higher than he was. At that moment, he wanted to show what kind of teenager he was. Tears were already dripping from his eyes, and he spoke very quietly, but so that everyone sitting and listening to him could hear that he could no longer. Then he suddenly covered his face and head with his hands and started shouting at his father not to hit him. He said that he had just made a mistake. The actor who led this seminar could not take his eyes off his performance. He understood that he was doing it quite professionally. At that moment, the young man screamed for his father not to beat him. Song Yuri saw his work for the first time, but she also couldn't take her eyes off his game. The light was constantly changing depending on when it was necessary to show what. The girl who stood in the light, she empathized with the hero who was on stage, and she also helped him create an illusion. The next moment, the light was set so that it was visible someone, and as if he was already talking to someone. Specifically, he was talking to Mr. Lawyer. Son Yuri, watching everything that was happening, raised that her son had changed, and he was no longer the same as he was at the very beginning. She realized that this was the second act. The guy was talking to a lawyer and asked him if public opinion had changed, that it was an accidental murder due to constant violence against a child. That was the lawyer's main argument. He then added that a whole fan page for this guy had been created on the internet. Here he was no longer playing a suspect, but a lawyer who was saying that he would have to work on his speeches for the next court hearing. At the end, his monologue consisted of whether he was guilty or not. Of course, he considered himself not guilty because he said it from the very beginning. His character said that if he returned home, his father would most likely collapse and die. His case was really bad. Most likely someone set him up, so he decided that it would be better for him to admit his guilt, after which he could declare his sanity, which is exactly what the lawyer suggested. He played on feelings and showed these feelings in his one-man show. All the other guys looked at him and they no longer remembered how much time had passed. The ending was stunning. His heroes found him innocent. The guy was happy on stage, continuing to tell his monologue. He believed that psychological damage from constant exposure to violent actions. Then he started laughing very abruptly. It seemed like he was just out of his mind. Son Yuri, when I saw this game, I thought that most likely this guy's just a psychopath if he can play with his feelings like that. But he didn't stop and continued to play his son. It wasn't the end yet. He asked which prosecutor filed the appeal and why he demanded a lawyer to fix it, because he didn't pay him for it. Then he justified himself to the judge and told him that he was in a state of extreme stress during the first trial. Then his face began to change slowly. At first it was just serious without any emotion. Then his teeth suddenly clenched and began to grind in anger. The next thing his hero did was start shouting loudly that the judge was right. It was a planned murder. The rest of the students watched attentively and waited for the outcome. Yuman, who played the killer, started screaming that he hated his father and his creepy look like dirt from under his fingernails. He only remembered how he kicked and beat him. Then the guy's face changed again, and at some point he started smiling. He told the judge that he had just been waiting for a very long time. The young man took a few steps so that the shadow began to fall on the wall. He said that when his father would let down his guard and hide, he was waiting for this moment, and then he would slowly and carefully approach him. Then he went to the wall and made it so that the shadow fell on this wall, and it was visible how he would kill his father. At that moment, the young man said, "Bam!" And that's it. For a few more seconds, he stood there in silence, his shadow moving towards the wall. When he caught his breath, he turned his head, looked at the others and said that this was the end of the whole story, and asked them if they were not happy. Then he took a piece of paper and looked at it carefully, pretending that he was reading from beginning to end. Then he said everything that was written there, about the fact that the defendant was sentenced to life imprisonment. The guy lowered his head down and stood in complete darkness. When the light was turned on, he was already sitting on the floor and his shadow fell on the wall. At that moment he shouted and the prisoners went to eat. The young man pretended that he existed so that everyone else would believe it. He ate very slowly. It seemed that he was experiencing every grain that came his way. Then at some point he shrank all over and became somehow hunchbacked and very small. Then he started explaining that he had just eaten warm rice and it was very tasty. These were his last words to his son. The light went out and there was complete silence. Then the light from the audience suddenly turned on. It was clear that this was the end of the one-man show. In front of them stood Yuman, who lowered his head and thanked everyone for watching this performance. The reaction of the guys was different, but the most important thing that he liked and what he saw was that Song Yuri was impressed by this one-man show. And also under great seal was the actor who led this seminar. He didn't even hide his emotions. Right after the lights were turned on in this auditorium, he told the young man that he thought, of course, that this guy was a newbie, but he was already an excellent actor. Song Yuri thought that she was not entirely right, and from now on she will respect vacant positions. Suddenly for everyone, the actor said that he seemed to be right, and the young man had one problem. Yuman didn't understand what the problem was, but the actor said again that he really does have one problem. The actor said that when he saw him in a short play, he thought his acting was flawless. Putting aside his ability to get into character and suggesting that it was innate, it seemed like he knew how to use his body and voice and he couldn't find any flaws in his acting at the time. Well, back then, when he first watched this performance with the professor in class, he thought that he could give him a couple of good tips. And now when he watched his performance, he became completely sure that his assumptions were correct. Of course, in a short play, it was appropriate. But a full-fledged production is a completely different matter. His performance may be impeccable, but it will be very difficult to watch. Then he told the young man that even when he was standing on the ground, he did not stop floundering. He was afraid of drowning. The actor said that he just wants to say that he doesn't have to squeeze everything out of himself and show all his feelings. It's normal. He said that Shin Yuman is standing in front of them here now only because he deserves a lot of attention. These words of praise greatly raised the young man's self-esteem. He lowered his head and thanked the actor who led the seminar and who gave him some advice. Since this was the last day of their practice, the next evening, there was supposed to be a banquet to mark the end of this summer practice. Song Yuri held a huge glass in her hands and said that she thanked everyone for going with them until the end of this practice and also thanked everyone for their efforts. All the other guys raised their mugs and said, "Let's go," after which they started drinking beer. At a separate table sat the same actor who led the last seminar, and the young actor asked if they could have a drink too and poured a little on the young man. There was a large amount of food in front of them, but the actor wanted to talk to him. He had a few more questions, and the first question that popped up in his head was that he wanted the young man to answer whether in yesterday's show he was conveying some personal experience or whether it was all a game. The young man scratched his head and said that no, everything is fine in his family. He even gets along well with his younger sister. Then the actor did not understand how he could show these emotions. The guy said that he wanted to say something about the experience. He asked permission to express his opinion. The actor told him the main thing several times that he could do it as much as he wanted. Then the young man said that he does not think at all that vivid expression of emotions depends on experience. His words did not affect the actor at all, and he continued drinking his beer. Then he very calmly, after drinking, put the mug on the table. He thought, how can one say that the bright expression of emotions does not depend on experience? He didn't understand because he was only 23 years old, and if he hadn't experienced the strongest ups and downs, then where did such expressiveness in his emotions and what he showed on stage come from? The young man told his interlocutor that he personally feels the emotions of the hero. When he immerses himself in the role, he clears his mind of unnecessary things. Then he added that this is not an understanding based on experience. He really feels how he would feel if he were this person. Then the young man put his hand on his heart and said that this is why he didn't really like the lesson on maximizing emotions. He believes that an actor should open up to himself. This can help to awaken emotions. If an actor dives into old wounds, it can be very dangerous. This conversation really touched his interlocutor, and he wanted to ask him to tell him as a newbie how he then awakens emotions in himself. It was not a very simple question, and the young man thought for a while to answer it correctly. The first thing that is very important for him is emptiness. Then, suppressing his glory, he opens his heart and feels that he would be this hero. At this moment, he collects emotions, studies similar people, or in the lawsuits, void data. While he reads the script, he looks for every emotion that the hero could experience and exactly how his character will be built until he becomes its embodiment. His interlocutor, an actor, said that this is a method straight out of textbooks. Then the young man returned, and he said that it is not so simple. The young man tried to explain to him that this was not a hero based on Yuman, but he had managed to create a hero more like himself. The actor thought about this expression of the role based on. The actor also thought that he always focused on tragedy when he wanted to express some emotion, and because of this basis, all his characters came out the same, and yet he was invited to many places because the public loved his acting. But his acting skills and acting ego gradually reached their limit. He thought that he could not step over it because he rarely felt joy. Does this mean that the problem is in the way of expression itself? This actor at this moment had the feeling that he had talked to an actor who had been thinking about acting for a long time and not a newbie. Therefore, the actor thanked the young man and said that he also had something to learn from him. They clinked glasses. Immediately after this conversation, the young man hurried to the exit. He opened the door and went out into the street. At that moment, he heard the voice of Song Yuri, who asked him for forgiveness and asked him to stop. The young man stopped and asked questioningly what was going on. The girl began to make vague excuses. Then she suddenly lowered her head down and asked him for forgiveness. The girl started saying that she had been rude to the person, had even not gotten to know him properly, and that was why she felt uncomfortable. She really felt very sorry. The young man looked at her and asked if he could ask her something. She allowed him to do so. Then he asked if their joint practice was useful for her. It was a bit of a surprise for her. She closed her eyes and blushed, thinking that she needed to take responsibility for her words. The girl crossed her arms in front of her and replied that their practice was very useful. She said that the first lesson was impressive, especially yesterday's game, and she learned a lot. At that moment, the young man took a deep breath and also closed his eyes. He was pleased to hear this. After that, he raised his head and said that he was ready to forget about everything because they were the same age, so they should be friends. The girl asked him again if he was really not angry with her anymore and if he was ready to be friends with her. The young man said that he holds no grudge against her at all and that everything is fine between them. Then he unexpectedly said that he was a fan of the Paradise Diaries, and Heezy Girl was surprised and said that she liked iced coffee. It was very funny to make fun of the young friend. The girl pointed at him and said that he played very well. The young man laughed and said that despite the fact that he was young, he thought that there was something professional about him, so he supported him. Sun Yuri laughed. She really felt that this guy was very good and she felt very comfortable with him. She thanked him again and they shook hands. As the last day of his internship ended, he immediately went to his parents for the holidays. Very soon he was driving with his parents in the same car, sitting in the back, buckled up like a little child, and his mother was asking if he wanted water. She also said that his sister was fine and that Yana would be with them very soon. Mom immediately looked offended and said that even though she was already an adult, that was no reason not to come home during the holidays. Dad said that he was coming to sacrifice something 100 to pass the exams. The young man smiled and said that they would still spend their summer holidays together no matter what. After the internship, he went on a trip with his family for 3 days and 2 nights, which means a lot to him, since it's the first time he's going somewhere with his family. And since he's back, the trip is even more significant because he has something to tell them. What he wanted to say he rehearsed for a long time, and therefore he finally decided to do it. He told his parents and his sister that he would become an actor. His mother and his sister had a surprised expression on their faces. None of them expected that he could do such a thing. Mom interrupted this pause and asked her son if he had to do this. The sister supported her mom and said maybe he would think about it because it was somehow sudden. The young man raised his head and said that this was not at all sudden. He'd been doing acting for a long time and he was already a celebrity. The father was the most outraged. Is he really among people who shine because he can't even move? Does he really think that he can attract the attention of the public? His father then said that he didn't think at all that he could become an actor, that he will be content with the role of some kind of walk-on or even just an ordinary extra. His father wanted to explain to him that he would really be satisfied with such a life if he did not become famous. If he was satisfied with it, then let him do what he wants. Yuman at that moment objected to him. He shouted, "How can he say such a thing? Why not just support his child's initiative? He shouldn't talk all sorts of nonsense." The father continued to impose his opinion and says that it is obvious because his child will not be happy, and no parent will tolerate such treatment. After this conversation, everything changed in his life, and it was after this conversation that he became independent. At that moment, he didn't think about their experiences, and for the first time after such a scandal, he didn't even know that this was another form of love. It was after this conversation that we didn't distance ourselves and only crossed paths a couple of times a year in awkward situations behind chairs. After he came back, we realized how much he had lost. He was just their son until he announced that he would become an actor. But in fact, it wasn't just him who suffered, the whole family suffered because he lost his home. This time he was driving in the car and thinking that he could discuss everything absolutely calmly. This would be his only opportunity that could not be repeated again. Even if his parents are against it, he will have to gradually prove to them that he can do everything and that he has results. You will be their procession, most of all the spirit of acting, he shouted, wow, every time. Because the spirit of acting really liked the sea, one could even say that he adored it. The young man asked him several times whether he really loved the spirit of acting and answered that he did more than anything else in the world. The spirit of acting seemed to be on stage and there were many actors around him. He looked at one of the people and said, wow, this guy's energy is not a joke. With such energy, you can become a great actor. Yuman wanted to see this guy, asked where he saw him. The spirit of acting showed him, and the young man was not a little surprised. A girl was approaching him with a suitcase in her hand, waving her hand at her mom and dad. It was his sister. When she came closer, Mom was very happy. She said that it was a little hot and she should eat near the air conditioner. Sister replied that no, it was better for them to sit with Dad. Then she looked at her little brother and was very happy that she met him again. The young man was also happy because he hadn't seen her for a long time, and even before he was demobilized, he asked how she was doing. His sister looked at the young man and it seemed to her that he had changed a lot. She immediately asked him what he had. He replied that it was a very funny joke. She behaved with him the same way as in childhood. The girl didn't understand that the army had changed him so much. His voice was completely different. His mother intervened and said that she had stopped making fun of her brother. The spirit of acting looked at her. He wanted to know if this was his sister. The young man said that this was his younger sister, Gemini. They are twins of different sexes. Their mother told her not to stand in the aisle and to sit down. His sister turned around and asked her brother if something had really happened to him during that time. He was simply unrecognizable. The young man laughed and then asked if he had really changed that much. His sister said that he couldn't even imagine how much. The spirit of acting at that moment thought that he had always wondered why Yuman was born with such low vital energy. Now everything was clear to him. Since they were twins, his sister practically took all of his life energy. The spirit of acting asked the young man, since his sister was given more attention than him from childhood, is that true? The young man said that yes, of course, he was given less attention. Then the spirit of acting said that this was the whole reason all his life force went to her. The young man turned around and looked at the spirit and asked him what he was talking about. Then the spirit explained to him that a twin is given twice as much energy as one person and he doesn't know why, but they have an imbalance. But paradoxically, it was only thanks to his sister that he was able to survive. Then the spirit added that the presence of her life force nearby compensated for his own shortcomings. It was even scary to imagine what he would do without her. The young man said that his sister always helped him. Their mother told him when they were very little. He always cried bitterly if he was separated from his sister. It was always when they were playing on the playground, and if he couldn't see her anymore, he would start to get hysterical. He started crying and screaming no, so she wouldn't leave without him. When they grew up, he also didn't want her to go for a walk without him. The other kids asked when he ran and fell who it was. Then his sister immediately ran up to him despite the fact that he was lying on the ground. She extended her hand to him and told him to get up. And then she took his hand and told all the other guys that he was her brother. She always held his hand and said if they wanted to play with her, then they should play with him. His sister said that you need to talk to him only in a friendly manner and you can't upset him. She explained that they are twins and they are the same age. Even though he was a boy, he practically cried throughout his childhood. His sister always protected him. When they went out to the playground and she was offered to play with other children, she always said that they would play together. And the most important thing is that his sister was never angry with him in childhood. He thought that it turns out that she actually saved his life. Yuman looked at his sister and said that she had also become prettier during the time they had not seen each other. Then she suddenly thought of something and turned to her parents. She wanted to find out from them how much pocket money her parents give her brother because he was wearing all new clothes. The young man told her to let him go. The girl demanded that she be given the same amount of money, but she also wanted new clothes. The mother said that her daughter could not get busy. Since the family was completely assembled, the young man had a resource. So the very moment came when he had to announce that he would become an actor. The whole family was sitting at the table. Only the father was standing and grilling barbecue. Yuman told his family that he had something to talk to them about. Then he looked at them all and said that he wanted to say something very important, that he would become an actor. His sister immediately asked if he was really her brother. She said that most likely her brother was replaced by aliens. Her mother also asked how that was. The young man didn't lose his head and said that he actually performed twice last semester and attended an acting workshop during the holidays. This wasn't a momentary whim. He really believed that this was his path. He also said that even an active actor said that he has talent. These words surprised their father very much, and he asked who this active actor was. The young man said that this actor's name is Yoon Hansen. When my sister heard this name, she asked again if this was the same one who plays the main character in the last minutes. The young man said that it was him because he was an instructor at the seminar. His sister asked him again if he really said that her brother had talent. The young man answered that he did and said that he had his contact information. Then his sister said that it was impossible. His brother had definitely been changed, and the young alien said that his parents were of course worried, but because it was an unstable job, he knew everything perfectly well. But he said that it was on this path that he could be happy. His father lowered his head and closed his eyes. He needed to think. Then he raised his head and told his son that during that semester he left early in the morning and returned late at night, and this was because he spent that time in the theater. His father was never verbose, but he loved his son very much, so he didn't want anything bad for him. He then added that at that moment, when he went to the theater, the whole world was glowing, and he was very pleased to see it. He had never seen him so enthusiastic and full of energy as this semester. That's why, oddly enough, my father said that he doesn't want to if he's drawn to it, but he's really very worried because he wasn't particularly noticeable as a child. The young man said that they would have a performance in the fall, and he invited his parents to come and watch him play, and if after that they were still against it, he would reconsider his decision. His mother was a little surprised. She said that she and his father were very far from the theater. The young man said that you are there. There is nothing to worry about. And then he added that he was introducing them to the theater. At that moment, he was simply glowing with happiness. Time flew by very quickly and classes at the university began. All the guys came together and told each other how they spent their holidays. This time, when the young man opened the door to the classroom, he immediately heard his name. His friends waved their hands for him to go to them. He was also very glad to see them. The guys were sitting and talking about how you spent your holidays, but they were all happy to see the young man and didn't know that it was the same one from the seminar. Yuman, as I wanted, chose a course in dramaturgy to follow his acting method. The young man said that he had tried to write a script before and thought that it would be good for him. Yuman asked why they are the only ones on this course. Doesn't Manhwa go to this course? The guy said that the girl took a break to work as a substitute for the autumn show. Yuman was a little surprised. Then they didn't say that there was a very long story there, and since classes had already started, they would tell him a little later. Yuman felt a look from the side. He immediately turned his head and looked at who was looking at him like that. He was a little surprised by who he saw sitting next to him. It was the guy he had entered this university with. And this guy's name was Jun Young. He called him because he wanted to talk to him. For him, it was very unexpected.